You've heard of places that whisper secrets, but Gaskill House? That's a place that screams. Nestled in the quiet woods of upstate New York, it's a crumbling mansion with a history like a ghost story waiting to be told. Built in the 1800s by a wealthy industrialist, it was supposed to be a family home, a place of warmth and laughter. But something changed. Something dark. And now, the walls don't just echo, they wail. The locals say you can hear it at night, a sound that chills you to the bone, like a lullaby gone wrong. It's not just the sound, though, it's the silence that follows, the way the air seems to hold its breath. If you're lucky, you might catch a glimpse of a figure in a window, a woman in a long gown, her face pale and sorrowful. But if you're not, you'll just hear it and realize you're not alone. And that's why we're here, to uncover the truth behind the wails, to find out what happened in Gaskill House, and to listen to the walls, to the past, and to the stories that refuse to be silenced. You know, the Gaskill House didn't start as a haunted house. It began as a home, a place where love, laughter, and the scent of fresh bread lingered in the air. But then, tragedy struck. The Gaskill family was well respected in town. They were kind, they were wealthy, and they had a daughter named Eleanor. Eleanor was the heart of the house, the one who brought the light and warmth. You remember the first time you heard it, don't you? That low, mournful wail that slithered through the trees like a shadow with a voice. It wasn't a wind, not really, just a whisper of something ancient and aching. It came at dusk, when the light was fading and the world was still, but the air had a weight to it. You thought it was just the sound of the river, but then the wind shifted and the wail grew louder, more insistent, like a cry for help. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a presence. You felt it watching, waiting, and you couldn't shake the feeling that it had been waiting for you all along. The walls of Gaskill House had begun to speak. And then, one morning, you found the first mark. A small, deep gouge in the wooden door, like a claw had scraped against it in the night. You laughed it off, but deep down, you knew something had made itself known. You told yourself it was just a trick of the light, a trick of the mind, but as the days passed, the marks grew more frequent, more deliberate. The walls were no longer just walls, they were alive, and they were waiting for something. And so, you stood at the edge of the woods, heart pounding, not with fear, but with the quiet, creeping certainty that you had stepped into something that had been waiting for you all along. You remember the whispers, don't you? The ones that slithered through the halls like smoke, just before the lights went out. That night, the house didn't just hum, it screamed. The servants heard it too, though they never said a word. They called it the soul's lament. But you know what I think? That sound wasn't made by a spirit, it was made by someone who was never meant to be found. It was the night of the great storm, and the wind howled like it was trying to break in. Then came the cry, sharp, piercing, and full of desperation. It wasn't a child's cry, nor a woman's. It was a man's, and it was coming from the east wing. The caretaker ran to check, but the doors were locked from the inside. No one was there. No one had been there. And yet, the cry lingered, like a ghost in the walls, whispering something only the lost could hear. No one ever found him. Not the police, not the family, not the servants. But the house remembers. And if you listen closely, you can still hear him right before the walls begin to weep. So when you hear it, when you hear the cry, the whisper, the weeping walls, remember this. The house is not just haunted. It's waiting. I spoke to a retired nurse from Gaskill who said the walls don't just whisper, they weep. She told me the sound comes from the upstairs nursery, where she once heard a child's voice calling her name in the dead of night. She claimed the sound was more than a creak, it was a wail, like a little girl trapped in the walls, her voice rising and falling like a lullaby gone wrong. Another witness, a local historian, said the same thing. He said he heard the wailing during a storm, and when he looked up, the windows were all fogged over, and the walls seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. He described the walls as if they were alive, breathing, waiting. And though he never saw the ghost, he said the feeling of being watched never left him, even after he left. These are not just stories. They are echoes of a past that refuses to be forgotten. And sometimes, it's the walls that remember best. The team arrived at Gaskill House with notebooks, cameras, and a shared sense of trepidation. We were all eager, but also aware that some things are best left undisturbed. As we stepped inside, the air grew colder and the silence felt heavy, like it had been waiting for us. We moved carefully, as if the house itself might react. The audio equipment picked up faint whispers, like voices trapped in the walls, echoing in a language we couldn't quite place. It was eerie, but not quite terrifying. One of the researchers found a journal hidden in the attic, filled with frantic entries about the house's wailing walls, a voice that could only be heard at night, and never by those who stayed too long. As we left, the wind picked up, and the walls seemed to hum, as if the house itself was remembering us. We didn't know if we'd ever hear those whispers again. You know, the thing that has never been explained is the sound. Not the wails, not the screams, but the sound that came just before it all began. A low, mournful hum, like a cello playing in a ghost town. It wasn't a noise you could place. No wind, no machinery, no one in the house. Just this sound, like the house itself was breathing. And it was always there, just before the wails started. Some say it was a family heirloom, a tuning fork left behind by the original owners. Others say it was the ghost of a child trying to reach out. But no one knows for sure. And that's the thing. The sound never fades. It just waits like the house is holding its breath, ready to let out a scream at any moment. And no one dares to play that fork again. You've heard the whispers, haven't you? The ones that say the walls of Gaskill House don't just echo, they scream. Some say it's the voice of a woman, others claim it's a child's cry, but no one can agree on the story. Some locals think the ghost is a vengeful spirit, others believe it's just the wind howling through the cracks. But there's one thing everyone agrees on, it never stops. Not for a second. You might think you're hearing the past, but what if you're just hearing the echoes of a future that hasn't happened yet? Sometimes the most chilling stories aren't about what's been lost, but what's still to come. And so the legends live on, not just in the walls, but in the stories we tell each other. The question is, will you be the next to hear them? You've heard the whispers, felt the chill, but the truth still hides in the dark. No one knows what happened that night, and no one ever will. The last known witness, a young boy who ran away from the house, never spoke of it again. He said he saw a figure, but it vanished before the police arrived. The sheriff who investigated called it a trick of the light, but the townsfolk still gather by the old well, sharing stories and offering prayers for the lost soul that haunts these walls. So, dear listener, what do you believe? Was it a ghost, a dream, or something far more terrifying waiting in the silence? You can almost hear the walls whispering, but I wonder if they're just remembering the laughter that once echoed through these halls. Sometimes, the most terrifying silence is the one that follows a long, long wail. I've told you the story of Gaskill House, but there are always more stories waiting in the shadows. Before we move on, let me ask you, do you ever wonder what's behind the door you never open? Stay with me, we're just getting started. You know, the first time Tinyham was mentioned in records, it wasn't for anything supernatural. It was a quiet little village, tucked in the rolling hills of Weymouth, where the sea kissed the shore and the air smelled of salt and lavender. It was peaceful, until it wasn't. In 1760, a group of villagers gathered in the old thatched barn, worried about the coming war. They didn't know it would change their lives forever, but they did know it would bring strangers, and with strangers came secrets. Those strangers weren't just soldiers, they were mercenaries, brought in to build a fort and keep the peace. But they brought more than bullets. They brought disease, fear, and a sense that the village had already been broken before the war even began. And then, the war ended, the soldiers left, the fort was abandoned, but the village, it had been left behind, its people scattered, its land taken. And the story of Tinyham began not with ghosts, but with betrayal and loss. You remember how the wind used to whistle through the hollows of the old stone walls? Well, now it carries a different sound, one that doesn't belong to the world we know. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The villagers say it was just the wind, but the children began to notice things that made their skin crawl and their dreams feel too real. There were whispers in the night, not of voices, but of something watching. Something that knew their names and their fears before they could even name them. One by one, the children stopped coming home. Not because they were lost, but because they had been taken. Not by strangers, but by something that had been waiting for them all along. And now, as you sit here, you might hear it too, a sound so quiet, so familiar, that you might not realize it's not just the wind anymore. You remember the day the sky turned gray and the wind started to howl like it was trying to warn us. It was the day the children vanished, and the silence that followed was louder than any sound. The schoolhouse stood empty, its windows dark, but the chalkboard still held the day's lesson letters half erased, like the children had never been there at all. The last person to see them was a farmer who said they were chasing a stray lamb, but the lamb never came back, and the children never did. The village held a funeral for the lost, but the ground refused to take them. The soil was too cold, too silent, like it was waiting for someone to return. To this day, the wind still whispers their names, and the trees still bend as if bowing to a memory they can't forget. I remember the way the wind would howl through the hollows of Tinyham, like it was trying to carry a child's cry away. Some said it was the lost ones whispering from the earth. An old farmer told me he saw a figure in the woods just after dark, dressed in a little girl's dress, her hair flying like a ghost in the wind. He said it looked like it was running from something. Another witness swore she heard children laughing in the village square, but when she looked, there was no one there. The sound was so clear, it made her skin crawl. Some said that children were still there, trapped between worlds, waiting for someone to remember them. Others said they were never children at all, but something else entirely. No one knows for sure what happened in Tinyham, but the echoes of those lost children still linger. You can hear them if you listen closely enough. The first clue came from a faded diary, its pages brittle with age, tucked inside a hollowed-out tree stump near the old schoolhouse. The writer spoke of children who vanished, never to return. A local historian, her hands trembling with age and memory, showed me a map with 3 red X's each marking a spot where children were last seen, but never found. They found a child's toy buried beneath the roots of an ancient oak, its paint peeling, its strings frayed. It was the only physical evidence left of the lost ones. The police had long since given up, but the villagers still gather in the old churchyard, whispering names, lighting candles, and waiting for anything to happen. And then, one autumn night, a child's laughter echoed from the woods, clear, bright, and impossibly real, as if the past had finally found its voice again. You see it now, don't you? That one little thing that just doesn't fit. The missing thread in the tapestry of Tinyham's past. What happened to the children, really? No one ever said. It's not the lack of names or the lack of graves. It's the silence, like the village itself has chosen to forget, or maybe to protect. And the children, they're still waiting for someone to ask the right question. You ever wonder, when you look at a ghost story, what it's really trying to tell you? Maybe it's not the how, but the why. And maybe the answer is still buried in the soil of Tinyham, waiting for the right hands to dig it up. So here's the thing, the one detail that has never been explained. And maybe, just maybe, it's the one thing that could finally let the children go. Some say the children of Tinyham still play in the old schoolhouse, their laughter echoing like wind chimes on a cold night. Others insist they're not children at all, but something older, something forgotten. The local elders whisper that the children were never meant to be here. They were part of a secret wartime project, hidden away to protect them from something worse than war itself. Some think the village itself is cursed, a place where time stands still and the past won't let go. Others say it's a message from the children, a warning for those who forget. And then there are the ones who say the children were never lost at all, that they were never meant to be found, that they're still here, waiting, watching, and remembering. There's something about Tinyham that lingers, not just in the air or the trees, but in the silence between the stories. You feel it, don't you? Like the village is holding its breath, waiting for the truth to surface. The records are sparse, the witnesses few, and the answer is still missing. You wonder, was it a tragedy, a secret, or something worse? The children are gone, but their echoes remain in the walls. You can almost hear them, can't you? The whispers in the hollows, the laughter that fades before it begins. The village is still, but the children are not. They're here, somewhere, waiting for someone to listen. And so, the mystery remains like the village itself, untouched, unresolved. Maybe it's not the ghosts we should be afraid of, but the silence that follows. You've heard it, haven't you? That quiet, that ache, that something just isn't right. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest echoes. Maybe that's why Tinyham feels like a whisper in the wind, a ghost that never quite leaves. I wonder what the children would say if they could speak now. Would they tell us their names, or just sigh and disappear into the mist? And perhaps, in the stillness of Tinyham, they are still learning to remember us. But I've saved the best for last. There's another story waiting, one that's just as old as the earth itself and far more terrifying than any ghosts. You ever heard of Walsall Manor? It's not on any map, but it's whispered about in the back rooms of pubs and the corners of old town halls. Some say it's just a name, others insist it's a place that doesn't want to be found. Built in the 1700s, Walsall Manor was once a grand estate, but the story goes that the last family to live there vanished without a trace. No bodies, no clues, just silence and a door left ajar in the great hall. The locals say the air around the manor is heavy, like it holds its breath. Some claim they've seen figures in the windows, but by the time they get close, the house seems to vanish into the fog. There are no records of the family's disappearance, no police reports, just rumors. But the real mystery is why the house remains, untouched, waiting for someone to step through that door. So, you're here, aren't you? Listening to this. Maybe you're curious. Maybe you felt something. But remember, the house doesn't want to be found. It just wants to be remembered. You see it now, the first spark of madness. A man named Thomas Walsall, a wealthy industrialist obsessed with the occult. He built this manor not just for comfort, but for control over his own mind and perhaps over his family. He gathered a circle of followers, doctors, clergymen, and mystics, believing they could unlock the secrets of the afterlife. But what they found was not wisdom, but a trap for the soul and for the body. Thomas's wife, Eleanor, suspected something was wrong. She tried to leave, but the doors locked from the outside. She tried to call for help, but her voice was swallowed by the silence of the manor. And then, the screams, not from the living, but from the dead. The manor's walls had no mercy, and the cost of their experiment was a massacre that would never be spoken of in Walsall's name. The truth of what happened that night was buried with the bodies, but the manor remembers, and it waits for the next curious soul who dares to walk its halls. You remember how the weather turned just before the storm? Well, the same thing happened in Walsall Manor. The sky turned a sickly gray, and the air grew thick with a silence so heavy it felt like it was holding its breath. The servants started acting strange, staring at the walls like they were waiting for something. One of them whispered that the house was watching them, and it wasn't just the wallpaper. Then came the sounds, soft, like whispers, but not quite words. They echoed through the halls, and the cook said they sounded like the voices of the dead, trying to speak through the walls. The most unsettling thing was the way the house seemed to shift. The door would creak open on its own, and the windows would fog up as if someone had just breathed on them, even though no one was there. By the time the first body was found, the house had already begun to scream. Not with sound, but with something deeper, something that made the air itself feel like it was holding its breath. You remember the storm that night, don't you? The sky was black as a widow's veil, and the wind howled like a banshee in the trees. The only sound was the crack of thunder and the faint echo of a child's laughter in the distance. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The last known sighting of the Walsall children was just before the storm hit. They were playing in the yard, laughing and chasing each other, unaware that the storm would bring more than just rain. The storm broke with a fury that shook the very bones of the earth. Trees snapped, the sky cracked with light, and then silence. The children never came home. No one heard a cry, no one saw a struggle, just the wind and the rain. The next morning, the world awoke to a hush. No sound, no signs of a struggle, just the smell of damp earth and the faintest whisper of something not quite right in the air. To this day, no one knows what happened. Some say the house itself took them. Others say the storm was just the beginning. But the silence remains, and the wind still sings a lullaby no one can hear. I spoke to a retired school teacher who claims to have seen the lights flicker in the windows of Walsall Manor on the night of the massacre. She said the whole village was quiet, like the world had held its breath. A local historian told me about a boy who wandered into the woods that night and came out screaming, claiming he saw figures in the trees, their faces obscured by the mist. One man swore he heard a child's laughter echoing from the manor's grounds long after the fire was out. He said it was a sound so sweet, it made him want to run away. A nurse who lived nearby said the silence after the fire was the worst part. It wasn't the absence of noise, it was the absence of life, like the earth itself had exhaled in grief. Even now, some say the wind carries the whispers of the lost. It's not a sound you can hear, it's a feeling, like the air has been poisoned by a secret the world was never meant to know. The first clue came from a dusty old ledger in the attic, its pages yellowed and brittle. It was filled with names, dates, and a single word, taken. One name stood out, Eleanor Whittaker, a local midwife. She vanished without a trace in 1946. No body, no trail, just a silence that felt like a warning. They uncovered a hidden room beneath the floorboards, its walls lined with jars of dried herbs and a single, rusted iron box. Inside, a letter from Eleanor, written in a shaky hand, warning of something buried in the earth. The letter spoke of a secret ritual, a sacrifice made in haste, and a promise that the blood would never be forgotten. It was a warning, but also a plea, don't dig where the shadows move. The investigators left the cottage with more questions than answers, their footsteps echoing in the silence, the wind howling just outside like a mournful song. You know, there's one thing about Walsall Manor that's always bugged me: no one ever explains how the blood got there. Just there, like it was poured from a jug. It's not like the blood was spilling from a body or a wound. It was just sitting there, like someone had taken a cup and poured it down the middle of the floor. That envelope, no one's ever found it, not even the investigators. Like the blood was a message, and the envelope was the answer. But no one ever asked the right question. You ever wonder what happens when the past refuses to stay buried? Sometimes, it just sits there, waiting for someone to look close enough to see what it's trying to say. You've heard the whispers, haven't you? The ones that say the blood still runs in the walls, that the screams echo through the stone like a lullaby. Some say it's the spirits of the lost, others say it's something far worse. There are rumors of a hidden chamber beneath the main hall, where the bodies were never found. Some say it's a vault, others say it's a tomb. But the locals know this, the ground still feels wrong there, like it's holding its breath. Some say the massacre wasn't a crime at all, but a ritual, that the victims were chosen for a purpose, and the blood was never spilled in vain. Others say the house itself is cursed, that it was built on the bones of an ancient forest, but no one can agree on what really happened. The truth is buried, like the bodies, and the only thing left is the silence. And sometimes, silence is louder than any scream. You know, some mysteries don't just fade with time, they settle in the bones of the earth, whispering their way through the cracks in the foundation of the world. And Walsall Manor? It's still holding its breath. The official records say the bodies were never found, but the locals know better. They tell of a secret tunnel, a hidden chamber beneath the house, where the truth might still be waiting. The police closed the case, but the truth, it's still out there, buried in the silence of the woods, waiting for someone to listen, and maybe someone to finally speak. So, dear listener, what do you think? Is the truth ever really lost, or does it just wait, patient and quiet, for the right person to find it? You can almost hear the wind whispering through the trees, like it's trying to tell you something you're not ready to hear. Sometimes, the silence is the loudest sound. The past doesn't stay buried, no matter how hard we try to forget. It lingers in the air, in the stones, in the stories that refuse to fade. And so, we return to the fire, to the warmth, to the stories that remind us we're never truly alone. But some stories, they wait for you. Until next time, my dear listeners, stay warm, stay curious, and may the shadows never quite let you go. You've heard the name, but have you ever stood beneath the weight of a house that holds a century of whispers? Lizzie Borden's home, a Victorian masterpiece, now stands as a silent witness to a crime that shook a town. Built in the late 1800s, this house wasn't just a home, it was a place where secrets were kept and silence was louder than words. The story of Lizzie Borden, the woman accused of murder, is one that lingers in the air like the scent of old wood and forgotten ghosts. What happened here in 1892? A tragedy that split a family apart and left a house haunted by the weight of a crime that still haunts the imagination. And now, as you stand on the threshold, you can almost hear the echoes of the past whispers of a woman, a house, and the shadow of a truth that refuses to stay buried. You know, the Borden family wasn't the first to call this house home. It was built in the 1840s by a man named Andrew Jackson Borden, a businessman with a temper and a taste for fine things. His wife, Sarah, was a woman of quiet strength, but their marriage was a storm waiting to break. The house itself was a symbol of their wealth, but also a cage. Andrew's temper and his growing obsession with his daughter Lizzie made the home a place of tension. Sarah, meanwhile, tried to keep the peace, but the pressure was unbearable. Lizzie was tried, convicted, and imprisoned, but the public was divided. Some believed she was guilty, others saw her as a wronged woman. The house became a symbol of both justice and injustice, a place where truth and myth began to blur. And so the house sat empty for years, a silent witness to the lives that passed through its halls. But as the decades turned, the stories of its past began to echo through the walls, and the shadows started to move. You ever notice how the morning light feels different when something's not quite right? That way the sun slants through the trees, it's like a slow, creeping hand trying to reach through the glass. The first signs came in the form of a broken mirror, not a crack, but a shift in the reflection, like the glass was holding its breath. Then came the whispers, not in the air, but in the silence, like the house was holding its own conversation, just out of reach. The worst part, you could never tell if it was the house, or if someone else was listening. It's easy to say, just a house with a past, but sometimes, the past doesn't want to stay in the past. You know, the moment that changed everything came on a summer morning, when the sky was clear and the air was thick with the promise of a perfect day. Lizzie was up early, the kind of early that feels like it's meant for baking bread and not for murder. She was in the middle of her daily routine when the sound came like a heavy object hitting wood. It wasn't the sound of a door slamming, but something more deliberate, more violent, like a hammer striking a nail with purpose. She ran to the source, her heart pounding like the clock in the house. She found her father lying on the floor, his hand grasping the edge of the window, blood pooling beneath him. The room was silent, but the silence was broken by the sound of something falling. And then, the second sound came. It was softer, more like a whimper, but it was enough to make her freeze in place. The kind of sound that suggests someone is still alive, still breathing, still trapped in a moment that will never be the same. That's when she knew. The moment she heard that sound, she knew it wasn't just a crime, it was a crime that would change everything. And it would follow her for the rest of her life. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. One woman claims she saw a shadowy figure pacing the second floor hallway just before the storm rolled in. She said it looked like a woman, but the light was too dim to tell for sure. Another visitor swore she heard a child's laughter echoing through the house, but when she turned, there was no one there, just the wind whistling through the old wood. There's even a story about a man who claims he saw a woman in a white dress standing at the foot of the staircase, waiting for someone who never came. Some say the house doesn't just haunt the living, it seems to remember the past and the people who walked its halls before us. These stories aren't just folklore, they're real accounts, and they all point to one thing: the Borden house is still waiting for someone to come home. The investigation began in the 1890s, with the sheriff's office digging through every scrap of evidence, every whispered rumor. You ever hear the phrase, truth is stranger than fiction? Well, that was the day it started to feel real. They found the axe, but not the murder weapon. The police had a theory, but the real mystery was what happened after the crime. You ever wonder what the silence says when it's too loud to speak? The most unsettling thing they found was the clue. It was a mirror that seemed to show the wrong side of the house, as if the building itself had a secret room it wasn't supposed to have. And then there was the whisper, a sound that wasn't heard, but felt. You ever wonder if some stories are told not by words, but by the way the air holds its breath? The investigation ended, but the house never did. It just waited, like a story that's too good to be forgotten. And sometimes, you wonder if the real crime was never the murder, but the silence that followed. You know, the thing that still haunts me about this place is the one detail that has never been explained. The moment the axe fell, the house seemed to hold its breath. No one ever found the actual weapon, not even the sheriff. It's like the house itself swallowed it whole, or maybe it was never there at all. It's like the house is trying to tell us something, but the words are just out of reach. You can almost hear it whispering in the silence between the footsteps. Maybe the real mystery isn't who did it, but what the house wanted to protect. And maybe it's still waiting for someone to ask the right question. You know, some folks say the house isn't just haunted by Lizzie, it's haunted by the whispers of every poor woman who ever felt trapped in a life she didn't choose. Others believe the real ghost is the one who never left the house, Lizzie's mother, who died of grief, or maybe the daughter who never had a chance to grow up. Some say the house is a mirror, and if you look too long, it shows you the life you never had. And the best part? No one can agree on what's real, which is why the house keeps on haunting us all. You know, the real mystery isn't just who killed Abby and Andrew Borden, it's why no one ever really solved it. The case just faded, like a photograph in the rain. The law was clear back then: if you kill your father and stepmother, you got the death penalty. But Lizzie walked free, and that's what keeps the whispers going. Some say the real answer was buried with the Borden family. Others say the truth was hidden by fear. But the case just didn't close. And that's the real ghost here. So you're wondering, what if the story isn't over? What if the shadows in that house are still waiting for someone to ask the right question? You've walked the halls of Lizzie Borden's home, felt the weight of history in every creak and shadow. But what do you think lingers in the silence now? Is it the echo of a voice, or the memory of a heart that never found peace? Sometimes, the most haunting things are the ones we can't quite name. The past doesn't stay buried, my dear. It waits, just beneath the surface, for someone to listen. And so we leave the Borden house with its secrets and its silence, and turn toward the next story where the shadows are just beginning. You've heard of the sea, of course, but have you ever heard of the sea's secret, its whispering heart? This is Mont St. Mitchell, a place where the tides dance with the stones and the sky bends low. It's a place of miracles and mysteries where the sea comes in and out like a lover, leaving behind a world of stone and silence, and taking it all away again. But there's more to this place than the sea and the stone. There's a lighthouse, built to guide the lost, but now it whispers secrets to those who listen closely. People say it was built by the devil himself, or that the builders were cursed, and now the lighthouse is haunted by the souls of those who tried to defy the sea. And if you're ever lucky enough to see the light from the lighthouse at just the right moment, you might just hear the echo of a voice calling you home. You know, the lighthouse wasn't always a beacon of hope. Back in the 1600s, it was a fortress, a stronghold for the Knights of St. Mitchell, and they had a very particular reason to guard this spot. The knights believed this place was sacred, a holy site where the sea and sky met in a sacred dance. But they also believed it was cursed, a place where the dead still lingered, watching and waiting. The legend goes that the knights built this place to protect the souls of the drowned, to keep them from rising again. But some say they were not the only ones who watched from the rocks. As the years passed, the lighthouse fell into disrepair. It was abandoned, left to the mercy of the sea and the wind. But something remained, something that refused to be forgotten. And so, the story of Mont St. Michel's lighthouse began not as a warning, but as a promise. A promise that some places are never truly left behind. You remember how the wind used to whisper through the stone, like a lullaby for the sea. But now, it's different. It's not just the wind anymore. It's the lighthouse itself breathing. The light at the top flickered, not like a faulty bulb, but like it was trying to say something. A message in a language we didn't understand. One morning, the keeper found the door ajar, though no one had been there. The salt air smelled different, like it had been holding its breath for too long. Then came the voices, just before dawn. Not the sea, not the wind, but something older, something that had been waiting in the dark all along. You can almost hear the silence now, the way it grows thicker, like the lighthouse is holding its breath, waiting for the next sign that it's not alone. You remember that lighthouse, don't you? The one that stands like a sentinel on the edge of the world, watching over the sea with its eternal light. But some say that light has a price. In the summer of 1954, a young woman named Leah Dupont arrived at Mont St. Michel with dreams of a new beginning. She was only 21 and she had everything to live for. The villagers whispered that the sea had taken her, that the lighthouse had seen her too late, but others believed she had been drawn by the light, not to Guy, but to be led somewhere else. To this day, some say you can still hear her voice on the wind, calling out from the cliffs. And if you listen closely, you might hear the echo of her footsteps fading into the dark. I remember the night the lighthouse blinked twice and the sea didn't answer. A fisherman said he saw her standing at the edge of the rocks, her dress flowing like the tide, but when he tried to call out, the waves swallowed his voice whole. Another said she was never truly there, just a shadow in the corner of his eye, a whisper in the wind. He swore she was trying to tell him something, but the storm drowned her words before he could understand. One of the keepers, long gone now, said the light didn't just shine at asterisk saying asterisk. He described it as a low, mournful sound, like the sea was crying. He said it only came out at midnight when the wind howled like a ghost. And then there's the one who said he saw her in the mirror. Not a reflection, but a asterisk presence asterisk. A woman in a white dress, standing behind him, watching. When he turned, there was nothing. Just the empty room and the sound of the tide. These stories don't make sense, not really, but they linger like the light of the lighthouse flickering, persistent, and just out of reach. We arrived at dawn, the lighthouse still breathing in the mist. The stone walls were colder than I expected, and the air smelled like salt and old secrets. The first thing we found was a rusted key hidden in the crevice of the door. It didn't match any locks, but it felt like a message from someone who had been here before. The floorboards creaked underfoot, and in one room, we found a diary. The pages were brittle, but the handwriting was clear. It was written in the voice of the lighthouse keeper's daughter, long lost to the sea. As we left, the wind picked up, and the lighthouse door slammed shut behind us. We had to climb back down the rocky path, the sea roaring in the distance like it was trying to warn us. We didn't know it then, but the lighthouse wasn't just haunted, it was guarding something that had never been meant to be found. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You know, the thing that haunts me more than the whispers or the cold is this one little detail that has never been explained. What exactly happened to the light? They say the light went out on the night the last keeper vanished. But no one knows if it was a lantern, a signal, or something else entirely that disappeared with him. Some say it was a curse, others a trick of the light. But the real mystery is why no one ever found the lantern, or what it became once it vanished. Maybe the light never went out at all. Maybe it's still burning, waiting for someone to find it and to finally understand what it was trying to show. Some say the lighthouse was built on the bones of a drowned saint. Others believe the sea itself is the true guardian of the place. But the real mystery lies in the whispers that still echo through the stones. In the 19th century, a French priest claimed the lighthouse was haunted by the spirit of a sailor who tried to drown the devil. He vanished without a trace, and the tale has never been fully explained. There's a theory that the lighthouse was cursed when it was built on the ruins of a pagan temple. The sea, they say, was once a sacred place, and the builders disturbed something they shouldn't have. A few brave souls still visit the lighthouse at night, hoping to catch a glimpse of the past, but they often return with stories of cold spots, distant voices, and a sense of being watched. And so, the lighthouse stands, a silent sentinel over the sea, its history wrapped in mystery. Whether it's the sea, the saints, or something else entirely that guards its secrets, no one can say for sure. You know, sometimes the most haunting things aren't the ghosts, but the questions that refuse to die. What if the lighthouse wasn't just a place, but a warning. The locals still whisper about the night the light went dark. No one saw the man who vanished, but the sea remembers. And the sea doesn't forget. No bodies were ever found. No footprints. No clues. Just silence. And the sound of waves. Always waiting, always watching. The mystery lingers like the last echo of a bell that never rang. You can't help but wonder, was it a tragedy, a warning, or something far more sinister? And so the lighthouse stands, a monument not just to light, but to the questions that never go away. What if the light was never meant to shine again? You've heard the echoes of the lighthouse, felt the weight of its silence. But sometimes, the quietest places whisper the loudest. What if the light isn't just a beacon, but a call? The sea remembers. It cradles the bones of the past, and in its depths, the stories never fade. What if the light was never meant to shine for the living? The lighthouse has seen centuries pass. It has outlasted empires, wars, and time itself. But some stories are meant to be told in a single night. So, my dear, as the night deepens, let the lighthouse remind you that not all stories end with a scream. Some end with a sigh, a whisper, or a light that never goes out. You ever heard of the Royal Academy of Art? It's not just a museum, it's a place that hums with the whispers of centuries. You know, the kind of place where the walls remember every brushstroke, every secret, every soul that ever walked through its doors. But there's something about its basement. A place where the air feels heavier, like the weight of history is pressing down on you. People say it's not just the art that lingers there, it's the stories, the echoes of those who were never meant to be forgotten. You ever wondered what it's like to walk through a place that's been untouched for decades, where the silence is so thick you can almost hear the ghosts of those who once lived, breathed, and created there? That's the kind of silence you find in the Royal Academy's vaults. And if you ever find yourself standing at the edge of that staircase, looking down into the unknown, you might just feel the weight of something ancient and unseen pressing against your chest. Like the building itself is asking you, are you ready to know the truth? Now, you might be thinking, what could possibly be so cursed about a place like this? Well, I'm about to tell you a story that's been whispered in the dark for over a century, and it's not one you'll forget. You ever wonder how something so grand could end up so broken? The Royal Academy of Art was once a beacon of creativity, a place where the most talented minds of the 18th century gathered to paint, sculpt, and dream. But behind those grand doors, there was more than just talent. There was ambition, rivalry, and a whole lot of secrets. It all started with a man named Sir John Soane, a visionary architect and art lover. He envisioned a place where art would flourish, where the world's greatest artists could come together to learn, create, and inspire. But even in his dreams, he couldn't foresee the darkness that would follow. One of the most famous figures to join the Academy was a painter named Henry Fuseli, known for his eerie, dreamlike works. He brought with him a reputation for both brilliance and controversy. Some say he dabbled in the occult. Others say he was just a bit too obsessed with the human psyche. But the Academy's troubles weren't just artistic. In the 1830s, a scandal erupted when one of the most respected members, a sculptor named Thomas Hope, was accused of stealing a priceless statue from a noble family. The case was never fully resolved, but the rumors followed him like a shadow. And then there was the vaults, those hidden, forgotten rooms beneath the Academy. Some say they were built to store the Academy's most valuable works. Others claim they were used for something far darker. What's certain is that no one ever really knew what was down there, and no one ever came back. You remember the first time you noticed the air had changed? It was just after sunset, and the halls of the Academy had a kind of hush that didn't belong to the silence of the night. The paintings seemed to shift when you blinked, not in a way that made sense, but as if the eyes in them were watching you, waiting for you to look away. Then came the whispers, soft, almost imperceptible, like a voice just beyond the edge of hearing, calling your name in a language you didn't know. You thought it was your imagination at first, but the chill that came with it wasn't from the cold, it was from the weight of something unseen pressing against your skin. And then, the first time you saw the figure in the corner of your eye, just a glimpse of movement, a shape that didn't belong, standing where no one should be. You told yourself it was just the old building, the age, the way the light played tricks. But deep down, you knew it was something else entirely. You remember the whisper in the hallway, the one that sounded like a child's voice calling out your name. It was just before the doors opened to the vaults. You turned, and the hall was empty, but the sound lingered, like a shadow you couldn't shake. The doors creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the faint scent of old paint and mildew clung to the air, as if it had never been cleaned in decades. You turned to run, but the hallway had vanished. You were now standing in the center of the vault, surrounded by towering shelves of dusty art supplies, their contents untouched for decades. And there, in the middle of it all, was a single child's drawing, blank, except for one word scrawled in red. You reached for it, but the moment your fingers brushed the paper, the room plunged into a sudden, cold stillness. The drawing shuddered in your hand, and for a moment, you swear you saw the child's face in the ink, watching you, waiting. Then the lights came back, and you were alone again. The drawing was gone. The vault was empty, but the child's voice was still there, just behind you, waiting for you to turn. I'd spoken to several retired curators who say the vaults whispered to them in the dead of night, a low hum like a forgotten lullaby. One even claims she saw a shadowy figure pacing the halls, always at the same hour. A former student described the air as thick and heavy, like walking through a memory you can't quite grasp. She said the walls seemed to breathe, and that the paintings themselves looked at her, watching. Some say the vaults are haunted by the ghost of a reclusive artist who vanished in the 1920s. His final painting, still hanging in the gallery, is said to shift when no one is looking, its eyes following you across the room. A janitor from the 1970s told me the most unsettling thing was the silence. No wind, no sound, just the feeling of being watched. He swore he heard a voice calling his name from the depths of the vaults. The most recent witness was a visiting art historian from France. She said she felt a chill, not from the cold, but from the air itself. She left the gallery, but the feeling stayed with her, like a memory she never lived. These aren't just stories. They're echoes of a place that refuses to let go. The Royal Academy of Art isn't just a museum, it's a living memory, and it remembers everything. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dot smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. We started by combing through the old records, and you know what we found? A whole stack of letters from the 1890s, all written in a frantic, looping script. They spoke of a secret room behind a grand staircase, filled with canvases that never dried. The caretaker, a gruff old man with a limp, refused to speak of it. But when we asked about the missing paintings, he let out a dry laugh and said, "They're not missing. They're just waiting." We followed the trail of whispers to a hidden passageway behind a tapestry in the library. The air grew colder as we stepped through, and the walls seemed to hum with something just out of reach. Inside, we found a room with a single, massive canvas. It was covered in thick layers of paint, but when we brushed it, the colors shifted like a living thing, and the air smelled like wet canvas and old secrets. The caretaker finally admitted that the room had been sealed for decades after a student vanished while trying to study the painting. He said the colors were alive and that the student was never the same after. So we left with more questions than answers, and a feeling that some secrets are better left buried. But I have to say, the painting still haunts me. It's like it's watching me. You know, the thing that's always bugged me about the Royal Academy vaults is that one detail. The one thing they never explain. You ever wonder what they're hiding? It's not the whispers or the cold spots. It's not the paintings that seem to move. It's the silence that lingers after the last visitor leaves, like the place is holding its breath. They've never told us what happened to the last curator, or why the vaults were sealed. It's like the academy itself is a tomb, and the secret is the grave. I've read every book, talked to every historian, and still, there's that one detail. The one thing they never explain. Maybe it's not a ghost. Maybe it's something else entirely. But that's the thing about the Royal Academy. It doesn't just haunt you. It makes you wonder. And sometimes, wondering is the scariest part of all. You've heard the stories, but here's the thing. Some folks say the vaults weren't just filled with gold and art. They say the walls were lined with whispers, and the silence between them was heavy with secrets. Did the Royal Academy ever truly close its doors? Some say the vaults were built not just for treasure, but for the souls of the artists who died in their creation. Others insist the Academy's founders were cursed by their own ambition. What if the art wasn't just made there, it was made asterisk with asterisk them? Some believe the vaults are still open, hidden beneath the Academy's new museum. A few brave souls say they've heard footsteps in the night, or felt a chill when no one was around. Have you ever wondered if the past is still breathing in there? The Academy's last curator, a woman with a sharp mind and a sharper tongue, swore she saw something move in the vaults before she left. She never said what it was, but she warned that some stories are better left undisturbed. Should we be listening? And then there are the whispers, soft, like the wind through old paintings. Some say they're the voices of the artists. Others say they're just the echo of a place that never truly let go. What do you think they're trying to tell us? You know, sometimes the real horror isn't in the ghost, but in the silence that follows. The Royal Academy of Art has a way of making you question whether you're alone or if you ever were. They found the body in the vault, but no one remembers who it belonged to. The police called it an accident. The art world called it a mystery. And the Academy? Well, they've never really answered the question. You might think it's just an old building with a dark past. But the real question is, what are you willing to do to uncover the truth? And what will you find when you finally look inside? The vault is still there. The stories are still being told. And if you're listening, you might just be the next chapter in the book that's been waiting for you. You know, sometimes the most chilling stories are the ones that feel like they were whispered to you just before you drifted off to sleep. And sometimes, the silence between the lines is louder than the words themselves. But I think you'll find, dear listener, that the real ghosts aren't always the ones we see. And that's just the beginning of the story, I suspect. So, if you're still with me, I've got one more tale that will make you think twice about the quiet places you pass by. You've heard of the sea, but have you ever heard of the place where the sea and the sky collapse into one? That's Mont St. Mitchell, where the tides turn the world upside down and the wind whispers secrets older than the stones. This isn't just a place, it's a living thing, a lighthouse that guards a secret that's been buried with the tides. Some say the light there doesn't just guide ships, it lures them in, deeper than they ever meant to go. But there's more to this place than just ghosts. The tides don't just rise and fall, they rise and fall with the weight of time, and sometimes they carry more than just water. So, if you're listening, you're probably wondering, what really happened here? Why does the lighthouse still shine, even when no one's there to see it? And why do the tides seem to remember something the world has forgotten? You know, the lighthouse wasn't always a beacon of hope, it started as a place of fear. Back in the 12th century, this spot was a holy site, a place where pilgrims came to pray and the sea was said to calm. But the monks who lived here had their own secrets. The monks believed the sea was a living thing, a spirit that could be appeased with offerings. They built the first tower to guide sailors, but they also built a wall to keep the sea at bay. That wall, you see, was more than just stone, it was a line drawn in the sand against the wild. But the sea never truly stayed away. Stories say that at night, the waves would rise higher, the tide would pull back further, and the monks would hear whispers in the wind, voices calling from the deep, begging to be heard. Some say the first lighthouse was cursed. Others say it was built on the bones of a drowned saint. But no one knows for sure. What we do know is that the sea has always had a way of getting back what it was given. And so, the lighthouse became more than a guide, it became a symbol of the battle between man and nature. A place where faith met fear and where the sea refused to be tamed. You remember the first time you noticed the lighthouse was different. The light was dimmer, like it had aged a few decades overnight. The air smelled faintly of salt and something older, something that didn't belong. The keeper's journal had strange entry words that didn't make sense, like the tide is coming in with its eyes open. You thought it was just a quirky old man, but the words felt like they were written by someone who had seen too much. One morning, the light didn't come on at all. The whole town was quiet, like it was holding its breath. You heard the wind whisper through the stones, and for a moment it sounded like a voice calling your name. Then came the shadows. Not the kind that move with the light, but the ones that stay even when you turn your back. You looked up, and the sky was full of eyes, watching, waiting. You started to feel it in your bones. The lighthouse was alive, and it wasn't welcoming you. It was remembering, and it wasn't happy about it. You followed the echoes of the lighthouse through decades of silence, but now the silence breaks. One morning, the keeper vanished, leaving only his watch log and a single, unlit candle on the tower's highest shelf. The log records the last hours with eerie precision, his hand trembling as he writes, his breath fogging the glass of the lantern. Then, a single line, "The light is gone. I cannot see it." They say he tried to light the lantern one last time, but the light refused to rise. Some say the sea took him. Others whisper he was never there at all, just a man who chose to disappear into the dark. And now, when the wind howls through the stone, you can hear him. Not in words, but in the silence between them. A man who chose the dark, and the dark chose him back. I've heard from a few folks who swear they saw the lighthouse glow even when no one was there. One woman said the light was a deep, pulsing red, like a heartbeat from the sea itself. Another man claimed he saw a woman in a white dress walking the cliffs at midnight. He said she never looked at him, just stared out to sea as if waiting for someone. There's a fisherman who said the light pulled him toward the cliff. He didn't make it back. His boat was found on the shore, but the man himself was never found. And then there's the old woman who lived in the village. She said the lighthouse wasn't built by men, it was built by the sea, and it's still waiting for something. We began our investigation with the old records, and you know what? The lighthouse had been abandoned for over 30 years, but the town still remembered it like it was yesterday. They said the light had been dim for decades, but never gone out entirely. The first thing we found was a logbook from 1989, written in a shaky hand, detailing the last time the light was lit. The entries were erratic, almost like the keeper was losing their grip on reality. One entry read, "The light flickers, but it's not the wind." Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dub smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. We dug deeper and found that the lighthouse had been built on a site that was once a burial ground. The local priest told us that the land was sacred and that the people who lived there were never buried, but instead carried away by the sea at night. There were rumors, too. Some said that the light wasn't just a beacon, it was a warning. That the light had been seen from the sea, glowing with an unnatural blue hue, and that the fishermen who saw it never returned. And then there was the strange thing we found in the basement of the lighthouse itself, a box of letters, sealed with wax, addressed to a woman who had never been heard from again. The letters spoke of fear, of a presence that followed her, and of a light that never went out. We left the lighthouse with more questions than answers, but something about the silence there felt different, like the building itself was waiting, and the light had never gone out at all. You know, sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't what you see, but what you don't. Like the silence that hangs over Mont Saint Michel after the last bell rings, and no one dares to ask why. Every tour guide will tell you the same thing: the light keeps burning. But what they don't mention is how it never goes out, even on the darkest of nights, even when no one's around to see it. There's a story about a young woman who climbed the tower years ago, and she never came down. No one saw her, no one heard her. Just the light, still burning, and the silence where her footsteps once echoed. But here's the thing. No one has ever found the light's source. It's as if it's not powered by any fuel or any human hands at all. Just there, like it's waiting. And that's the one detail that has never been explained. Not by the guides, not by the locals, not even by the people who live in the shadow of that light. Just a mystery that lingers, like the fog, and never fades. You've heard the tales of the lighthouse's ghost, but what about the ones that don't make it into the books? The locals still whisper about the woman who vanished in 1923, her footprints found in the salt and sand, leading to nowhere. Some say she was a painter, others a widow, but what they all agree on is that she didn't walk away from the sea she was pulled under, and the tide never brought her back. Some people say the lighthouse is cursed, but others insist it's just a place where the sea remembers. A place where the wind carries voices and the waves speak in riddles. So, what do you think? Was it a woman who walked too close to the edge, or something older, something that was never meant to be seen again? The sea doesn't forget, and neither does the lighthouse. You know, sometimes the most haunting thing isn't the ghost, it's the fact that no one ever found the body. The lighthouse still stands, but the man who vanished in 1947, he's been missing for over 70 years, and no one's ever figured out why. Local fishermen say they saw a light on the cliffs that night, but by morning, the sea had washed the shore clean of any trace of him. Some say he was chasing a smuggling ring, others say he was just lost, but no one's ever come close to finding him. The Coast Guard has searched this place for decades, but the sea keeps its secrets. And in the quiet hours of the night, when the wind howls through the stone walls, some say they can still hear the echo of a man calling for help. So here we are, still waiting for an answer. The lighthouse remains, the sea remains, and the mystery lingers like the last breath of a man who never made it home. As the wind howls through the stones, I wonder what lingers in the silence between the waves. Is it the memory of a lost soul, or just the echo of the sea? You think the lighthouse is just a tower of stone, but it's also a keeper's home, a place where the light burns bright and the dark creeps in. Maybe the light never truly goes out. Maybe it's just waiting for someone to look up and see it again. So, dear listener, as the night deepens, I leave you with this: the sea never forgets and the light still watches. What will you see when you look up? Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a tale of a haunted mansion waiting just beyond the next hill, though I suspect it's the hill that's haunted. You've heard of the Library of Babel, right? That labyrinth of endless books, where every page is a riddle and no one knows which ones are real. But what if the true curse isn't the books themselves, but the whispers that echo through the halls like someone is always reading to you? The library isn't just a place, it's a legend. A place where lost souls get trapped between pages, where the words seem to shift when you're not looking, and where some say the books have a will of their own. But the real horror, no one ever leaves. The library is said to have no beginning, no end. It's a place where time folds in on itself, and the same book can be found in 1,000 different locations, all slightly different. But one thing is certain: once you step inside, you'll never be the same again. And that's why we're here, to listen, to wonder, to ask, what if the library isn't just a place, but a warning? A place where the words you read become the reality you live. What if the books are not just filled with stories, but with the souls of those who dared to read them? You know, the Library of Babel didn't start as a library at all. It was once a quiet, scholarly town called Varnholt, where books were more than just paper and ink, they were the heartbeat of the community. In the 1800s, a wealthy patron named Eleanor Whitmore funded its construction. She believed knowledge was power, and power was worth any price even if it meant burying the past. They brought in rare manuscripts, forbidden texts, and even some that were never meant to be read. But what they didn't realize was that some knowledge comes with a price. The library was completed in 1872, but the true story of its founding didn't end there. The scholars who built it never left, and the books began to whisper secrets that no one was supposed to hear. You remember the way the books used to fall, just a little, like they were sighing. But now they're not falling, they're floating. Not quite, but it's the way they hover, just above the shelves, like they're waiting for something. The librarians started talking about the book whisperers, those who swore they heard the pages turning even when no one was around. But the whispers weren't in a language we knew. They were in the sound of paper, like it was breathing. The staff started seeing things, shadows in the corners, a figure in the reflection of the glass doors. They called it the reader. It wasn't a person, but it was watching. And it wasn't watching us. It was watching the books. One by one, the librarians began to vanish. Not taken, not left, but just gone. Their desks remained, their books untouched, but the silence was louder than any scream. And the books? They were still whispering. Now, the library is closed, but the shelves are still full. And the books? They're waiting. For what? I don't know. But if you ever find yourself in the Library of Babel, listen carefully. The books will whisper, and they'll know your name. You know, the real horror of the Library of Babel isn't the books or the endless corridors, it's what happened to the one who dared to read too much. One librarian, a woman named Clara, vanished without a trace. She'd been cataloging the archives for years, and she disappeared on the night the library's lights went out. The next morning, the staff found her desk empty, her notes scattered, and her favorite cup of tea still warm. But the books she'd been working on, those were all missing. The library had swallowed them whole, or so it seemed. And then, the books began to change. The ones she'd been working on, pages turned, words rearranged, as if the library itself was rewriting history. The staff started to hear whispers in the silence, and the lights would flicker for no reason. No one knows what became of Clara, but every time someone steps too deep into the archives, they swear they see her, just a shadow, a flicker of light, a whisper of a name. The library remembers everything, and it never forgets. I once spoke with a librarian who swore the books whisper to her. She said they hum in the dead of night, like 1,000 voices trying to be heard at once. She described the sound as a low, resonant vibration, like the earth itself was breathing. Some say it's just the wind, but she insists it's something older, something alive. Another patron claimed to see a figure in the stacks, dressed in a long, black coat, its face obscured. They never saw it again, but they swear the books turned to dust the next morning. These accounts are scattered, but they all point to one truth. The Library of Babel isn't just a place. It's a presence, and it's waiting. We followed the trail of whispers through the archives, where dust motes danced in the slanted light. Every corner held a secret, and every secret felt like a warning. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The librarian, a woman with a quiet intensity, led us deeper. She spoke of books that had vanished, and of voices that echoed when no one was listening. One name stood out, Alina Voss, a woman who had vanished decades ago. Her final words said to be, "I'm not here anymore." We thought we had heard that before. As we left, the librarian placed a small, weathered book in our hands. It was unmarked, but the pages were filled with the same strange script we had seen in the ledger. We thanked her, but the feeling lingered. It was as if the library had already decided what we would remember and what we would forget. You know, the real mystery isn't the ghosts or the missing books, it's the one thing that no one ever seems to ask. What happened to the librarian who disappeared in 1943? No records, no body, just a locked room and a desk covered in ash. They say she was found in the basement, but no one ever found her. And the most curious part, the door to the basement was locked from the inside. And yet, no one remembers ever seeing a key. But here's the thing, dear listener, no one ever went back to check the basement after that. Not even the new librarian who took over in 1978. And you know what they say about curiosity in a place like this. So now, you're the one who's wondering, will you go down there? Or will you let the library keep its secrets, just like it did for so many before you? You've heard the stories, but here's the twist. Some locals swear the archives are alive. They say the books whisper in the night, not in words, but in tones that match your own heartbeat. There's a theory that the library wasn't built by humans at all. Some say it was a trap, a test of memory and courage. Others say it's a mirror, showing you the truths you buried deep. Theories keep changing, like the library itself. One day it's a tomb, the next a temple. But one thing's certain, those who enter never leave the same. And still, people come, not for answers, but for the chance to feel like they're part of something bigger. Like they're not just reading the stories, but living them. There's a reason this case remains unsolved, and it's not just because the library's labyrinthine halls swallow time. The records are missing, the witnesses are gone, and the only thing left is the scent of old paper and a whisper that never quite reaches you. Some say the library was never just a place of knowledge, it was a vault, a place where secrets were buried and forgotten. But what if the curse wasn't on the books, but on the people who tried to remember them? The last librarian who worked here vanished without a trace. They left behind a journal, but the last entry is blank. Just a single word scrawled in the margin, no more. What does that mean? Was it a warning? What? Or a confession? You might think the curse is in the library, but what if it's in the silence between the pages? What if the real mystery isn't the ghosts, but the stories we choose to forget? And so we return to the question, is the library cursed, or are we the ones who have forgotten how to read the truth? You walked through the labyrinth of the Library of Babel, where every shelf holds a secret and every page whispers a warning. But sometimes, the most dangerous stories are the ones that never get told. There's a quiet terror in knowing that somewhere, in the endless corridors of knowledge, a truth still waits to be found, or a ghost still waiting to be remembered. So my dear listener, as you leave this tale, remember that some stories don't end. They just wait for the right moment to begin again. Now, with the chill of the unknown still in your bones, I'll leave you with the promise of another story, one that's waiting just beyond the next shelf. You've heard of the White House, of course, but have you ever wondered what secrets lie beneath its marble floors? A place where history and tragedy have left their mark, and where the air still hums with the weight of the past. It's not just presidents and state dinners that have shaped this hallowed ground, it's also the blood of those who lived, loved, and died here. A place where every room holds a story, and some stories refuse to be forgotten. Some say the floors themselves are cursed, soaked in the tears and blood of those who passed through. A place where the silence is louder than the voices that once filled the halls. And yet, for all the mystery and the stories, there's still so much we don't know. So many doors left ajar, so many rooms that never quite feel quite right. So, dear listener, what do you think? Is the White House truly haunted, or is it just the weight of history that makes it feel so alive? You know, the White House wasn't always the grand, stately home you imagine. It started as a modest two-story brick house, built in 1792 by James Hoban, an Irish architect who had once worked on the presidential mansion in Dublin. It was a simple place with a small garden and a thatched roof, not the grandiose palace it became. The first president, George Washington, moved in, and he brought with him a sense of duty and a few peculiar habits. He was known to sleep in his own bed, even though it was the same one his wife, Martha, had used. Rumor has it that he insisted on keeping the room locked, even after she passed away. It was during the presidency of John Adams that the White House began to take on its more recognizable form. He added rooms, expanded the mansion, and brought in French designers to make it more European. But some say the ghosts of the past didn't like the changes. The walls, they say, still whisper of the old ways. The real trouble started in 1814 when the British burned the White House during the War of 1812. The flames were fierce and the smoke was thick, but the story goes that the spirit of the First Lady, Dolly Madison, tried to save the portraits and the furnishings, even as the house was falling apart. After the fire, the house was rebuilt, but the damage was more than physical. Some say the spirit of Dolly still lingers, a gentle presence that watches over the halls, her voice a soft murmur in the wind. You remember the first time you noticed something was off. It was just a flicker in the corner of your eye, like a shadow that shouldn't be there, or a sound that didn't belong to the house. Then came the whispers, just a breath of sound, like someone speaking in a language you almost remembered. It was faint, but it made your skin prickle and your heart race. You started checking the rooms more carefully. The floorboards creaked in places they hadn't before, and the blood stains, they seemed to shift, like they were trying to tell you something. The staff started asking questions. Some of them said they'd heard the same whispers, others claimed they saw a figure in the halls, but no one would say where it came from. And then, one night, you heard it clear as day, a voice calling your name. It wasn't a trick, it wasn't a dream. Something was waiting for you, and it had been waiting a long time. You know, the White House isn't just marble and cherry blossoms. It's also where some of history's darkest secrets were written in blood, some of which still stain the floors beneath our feet. In 1876, a woman named Alice Longworth was found dead in the East Room, her body cold, her face frozen in fear, and the floor around her a deep, dark red. No one knew how she died, and no one ever found the weapon. Some say the stain is a ghostly imprint of her final moments, a silent scream trapped beneath the layers of history and marble. Others say it's just a trick of the light, but I've never been sure. You might think that after all these years, the mystery would be solved. But no, the stain remains, a quiet reminder that even in the most powerful halls of the world, the past can still bleed through. I remember the way the air would still, like the world held its breath when the lights flickered in the east room. Some say it was just old wiring, but I swear I saw shadows move where no one should be. One guest claimed she heard a child's laughter echoing through the halls late at night. She said it was too clear, too real, and she never believed in ghosts until she heard it herself. A former White House usher told me about a cold spot in the Lincoln bedroom, where the temperature would drop so low you could see your breath. He said it was the same spot where Lincoln's body lay after the assassination. Some say the ghosts of the first ladies linger, especially in the Blue Room, where they served their husbands and children. One woman swore she saw Eleanor Roosevelt's portrait smile at her just before the lights went out. There's a story about a ghost who never left the White House, a man who was there for a short time but never left. His name is whispered in the halls, and some say he's still waiting for his wife to return. The first thing they found was a sealed envelope, tucked behind the baseboard of the East Room. Inside, a single line in a trembling hand, "They're still here." Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Then came the whispers just above a whisper in the halls where the president once held court. Some said they were the voices of the founding fathers. Others claimed they were the ghosts of those who died in the White House. The most unsettling thing? A mirror in the Blue Room. It didn't reflect the person in front of it. Instead, it showed someone else, someone who had been there before and had never left. They kept the mirror, but the White House staff began to avoid the Blue Room. It wasn't just the reflection, they feared it was what it meant. That someone, somewhere, was still waiting. You've heard the rumors about the blood-stained floors, but there's one detail that's never been explained. What if the blood wasn't just from a single tragedy? What if it was from many? The official story says it was a single incident, but the stain doesn't look like it came from a single source. It's too deep, too old, too deliberate. What if it was a symbol? Theories range from a hidden crime scene to a coded message from the past, but no one has ever been able to confirm it. What if the blood was a warning, not a crime? We're told to believe the official story, but what if the truth is still hidden beneath those floorboards? What if the blood was never just blood at all? You've heard the whispers, haven't you? The ones that say the White House isn't just haunted by history, it's haunted by blood. Some say it's the blood of the first president's wife, Eleanor, spilled in the East Room. Others claim it's the ghost of a Union soldier from the Civil War, still searching for his missing brother. What do you think? Is it the weight of history, or something more personal? Maybe the White House is just holding on to its secrets, waiting for someone brave enough to ask the right questions. And if you're ever in the area, don't be surprised if you hear a faint echo of a woman's voice in the East Room. She's probably just trying to remind someone to clean up the mess. You know, the most haunting part of this story isn't the ghost or the blood-stained floors. It's the fact that no one really knows what happened that night. Did someone die? Did someone disappear? Or was it just a terrible accident, covered up by the highest levels of power? Even today, historians argue over the details. Some say it was a tragic family tragedy. Others whisper of secret political deals gone wrong. And then there are those who believe the White House has always been haunted by something far older than politics. And here's the thing, the mystery isn't just in the past, it's in the present, in the way people still whisper about it in hushed tones. Maybe that's the real ghost, the one that refuses to be laid to rest. So, as you leave this story, I leave you with a question. If you ever find yourself near the White House, do you listen for the sound of footsteps in the night? Or do you just walk away, wondering if you heard anything at all? You've walked the halls where history whispers and the walls remember, but sometimes the most haunting stories are the ones that never make it to the page. It's not always the ghosts that linger, it's the silence between the echoes, the way a room holds its breath just before the next tale begins. So, as we turn the page, remember that every story has its own quiet, its own stillness, and sometimes the most powerful chills come from the spaces we don't speak of. But before we go, what if the blood-stained floors of the White House were just the beginning of a story you've yet to hear? Stay with me, dear friends. The next tale is waiting, and it's not going to be the last. You've heard of the sea, but have you ever heard of the silence that follows it? Mont Saint Michel is a place where the ocean dares to forget its own name, and the lighthouse stands as a lonely sentinel, watching over a land that no longer remembers it. This isn't just a lighthouse, it's a relic of a time when the sea was wild, and the people who built it knew the price of its wrath. It stands on the edge of the world, where the water meets the sky, and whispers are said to carry farther than the tide. And yet, for all its tales, the lighthouse remains a place of wonder. It's not the ghosts that haunt it, it's the memories, the stories, the unspoken warnings that linger in the stones and the salt air. So, if you're ever in the mood for a tale that lingers long after the last wave has receded, come with me. We're about to step into the hollowing of the lighthouse, and I'll tell you everything, but only if you promise to listen closely. You see it now, don't you? That ancient stone, worn by time and tide, standing proud like a sentinel on the edge of the world. It's Mont St. Michel, and it's been here since the 8th century, a beacon not just of light, but of faith and fear. But back in the 12th century, it wasn't just a place of worship, it was a fortress. The Normans built it to guard the bay of Mont St. Michel, and it became the heart of a kingdom, a place where kings and commoners alike found shelter. You remember the way the air felt, heavy with the scent of salt and damp stone, like the sea had wrapped its fingers around the lighthouse and never let go. It was the kind of quiet that made your skin prickle, as if the walls themselves were watching. The first sign was a flicker in the lantern, just a momentary waver in the beam, like the light had a mind of its own. No one spoke of it, but the keepers started to whisper that the light had begun to breathe asterisk. Then came the sound low, like a moan carried on the wind. It wasn't the wind, though. You could feel it in your bones, the way it made the hair on your arms rise. It was the sound of something waiting asterisk. One morning, the keeper found the door ajar, though no one had left the night before. The salt on the floor had been disturbed, and the air inside smelled of something old, like the sea and the earth had finally met in the dark. And then, just before dawn, the light went out. Not just dimmed, but gone asterisk. The keepers said it was as if the lighthouse had exhaled, and with it, the last breath of something that had been inside asterisk all along. You see it now, don't you? That lonely, flickering light on the edge of the world. But what if it wasn't meant to be seen? What if it was a warning? A call to those who wandered too close. One stormy night in 1947, a young woman named Madeleine Dubois disappeared. She was the last keeper of the lighthouse, and the last light went out with her. Neighbors said she was mad. Others said she was cursed. But the truth, they say, is that the sea took her in the night, pulling her into the dark depths with the light she had been guarding. And now, when the wind is right and the fog is thick, you can still hear her voice. A whisper on the wind, a call to those who dare to stay too long. So, my dear listener, when you see that light, remember, it is not just a beacon, it is a memory, a warning, a ghost who still waits for someone to listen. I've spoken to a few locals who swear they've seen the light flicker when no one's around. One woman told me she was walking her dog on the cliffs one stormy night, and suddenly the lighthouse blinked just once, like a warning. She said the dog froze mid-step, eyes wide, and then ran off into the fog. She never found it, and the lighthouse has never been the same since. Another fisherman claimed he saw a woman in a white dress standing at the top of the tower, watching the sea. She didn't move, just stared, and then vanished when he approached. He said she looked like a ghost, and when he turned back, she was gone. The lighthouse has since been sealed off, and no one is allowed to climb it anymore. There are whispers of a curse of a woman who died in the lighthouse and now haunts the place she could never escape. Some say she's still waiting for someone to let her out. We started with the foundation, the stone that holds it all together. The team, a mix of historians and skeptics, brought tools and curiosity, not just cameras. You ever notice how the weight of history can make even the most rational minds feel a little uneasy? The first clue was a faint, rhythmic tapping like fingers on glass echoing from the base of the lighthouse. It wasn't loud, but it had a rhythm, like someone counting in the dark. Was it the wind or something more? In the archives, we found old letters from lightkeepers who spoke of a presence, not a ghost, but a feeling like the lighthouse itself was watching. One wrote, "It's not the sea that makes me uneasy, it's the silence that follows." Then came the strange symbols carved into the stone. No one could say for sure what they meant. Some said they were ancient, others that they were left by a lost crew. But no one could explain why they felt like a warning. And finally, the most unsettling discovery: fragments of old uniforms, tattered and worn, found in the foundations. Not the kind of thing you'd expect from a lighthouse, but from a place where people once lived and maybe still do. We didn't find proof of the supernatural, but we found something else: stories, silence, and the feeling that something was still waiting in the dark. What do you think it is? Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You know, there's one thing that has never been explained: the exact moment the light went out. No one remembers when it happened, only that it was sudden and the last light was gone like a whisper in the wind. The records say it was a storm, but no one remembers the wind being that fierce. And no one remembers the light being that bright before it vanished. Just a sudden, absolute darkness. Some say it was the end of an era, the last light of a bygone age. Others say it was the beginning of something else, something that still lingers in the stone and the sea. So here's the thing, the light went out, and no one knows why. But if you're standing there, looking up at the tower, you might wonder if it ever truly went out at all. You've heard the stories of the lighthouse, but what about the people who live with it? The fisherfolk who swear the light isn't just a beacon, but a whisper in the dark, a voice that calls them home. Some say the light has been guiding lost souls for centuries, not just ships. Some say it's a warning, a message from the past, but only if you're willing to listen. Some say the light was cursed by a priest who tried to protect the town from an ancient evil. Others say it's a guardian, a sentinel against the dark forces that lurk beneath the sea. And then there are the whispers, those who say the light still burns for someone who never left. A ghost who lingers, waiting for the right moment to return to the world of the living. You know, sometimes the most haunting stories aren't about ghosts, but about the questions that refuse to fade. What if the lighthouse never really stopped shining? The last keeper's journal was found in a drawer, half-burned, the pages curled and smudged with salt and thyme. The ink bled into the paper like a ghost trying to write itself out. The Coast Guard claims they've never found any evidence of a missing keeper, but the locals say the sea remembers. It remembers every lost soul, every unanswered question. So here we are, still waiting for answers, still wondering if the lighthouse is a monument to hope or to a warning that some doors never close. And if you ever find yourself wandering near the shore, listen closely. You might just hear the lighthouse singing not to you, but to the one who never made it out. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest echoes. Like this lighthouse, standing alone against the sea, it's not just a structure, it's a memory. There's a beauty in the way the wind whispers through the cracks, like it's trying to tell you something you've forgotten. And if you ever find yourself walking those stone paths, listen closely. You might hear it too. But don't worry, we've got more stories, and more lighthouses, and more mysteries waiting just beyond the next high. You've heard of the Tower of London, but have you ever wondered what secrets lie beneath its ancient stones? This is a place where history whispers through the cracks, and the air feels heavier than the London fog. Built over 8 centuries ago, this fortress has seen kings, queens, and countless tragedies. But it's not just the history that lingers, it's the echoes of those who were never meant to be forgotten. Some say the tower holds the souls of the dead, trapped between the walls of a place that never truly lets go. Others believe the sounds you hear are the voices of those who once called this place home. But what if the screams you hear aren't just imagination? What if they're real echoes of a time when the tower was a place of terror, not just power? As we walk through these halls, we'll uncover the stories that have made the Tower of London a place of both wonder and unease. And I wonder, what will you hear when you listen closely? You know, the tower began as a fortress, but it was built on more than just stone and ambition. It was built on secrets and the bones of those who dared to defy the crown. Henry Roman II ordered its construction in 1176. But it wasn't just about power. It was about control over people, over truth, and over the very idea of loyalty. The tower became a place where kings were crowned, and where they were also imprisoned, sometimes for treason, sometimes for simply being too ambitious. But the real horror of the tower wasn't just in its walls, it was in the people who lived and died within them. And some of them, it seems, never truly left. So, as we move through the halls of this ancient place, remember, every stone here holds a story, and some of them are still waiting to be told. You know how sometimes the air just feels different, like the world holds its breath? That's what it was like that day, so still, so heavy, as if the sky itself had forgotten how to move. The guards had taken their usual shift, but something about their steps felt off, like they were walking through a dream, not the real world. You can almost see the tension in their shoulders, like they're bracing for a storm they can't see. The bells, which had always marked the hours with a steady rhythm, suddenly fell silent. It was as if time had paused, and the tower was waiting for someone to return. The air grew colder, not just in temperature, but in feeling. It was a cold that wrapped around your bones and whispered, "You're not alone." And somehow, you knew that the silence was the loudest sound of all. You remember the old stories, don't you? The whispers in the stones, the way the wind carries more than just air. But what if the wind carried a scream? In 1548, a maid named Jane was found dead in the White Tower. No wounds, no signs of struggle, just a broken heart, or so the records say. Did she fall, or was she pushed? Some say the tower remembers, that it holds the echoes of every soul that ever passed through its walls. And some say Jane's voice is still trapped in the air, calling out for someone to hear. But why would a maid vanish in the middle of the night? Was she silenced for love, or for something far darker? The tower doesn't speak, but it remembers. And if the tower remembers, then maybe it's still waiting for someone to listen. I remember the night I walked the cobbled lanes of the tower, and the wind carried a whisper, not of the Thames, but of a woman's voice, high and pleading, echoing from the walls. A man who lived nearby claimed he heard the same sound every full moon, a woman's cry, like someone trapped behind a stone, begging for help that never came. One woman said she saw a figure standing at the top of the bloody tower, dressed in a red gown, holding something that looked like a child's hand, frozen in midair. The most chilling account came from a guard who swore he saw a woman in the courtyard, her face hidden by a veil, her body wrapped in chains, her eyes pleading, as if she had been there for centuries. These stories, though unsettling, are not meant to scare. They're meant to remind us that history lives in the stones, and some voices are still waiting to be heard. We followed the trail of whispers, led by the oldest records and the most haunted eyes. The walls here don't just remember, they scream in silence. The investigation began in the crypt, where the air felt heavier than the cold stone. It was as if the very walls were holding their breath. One of the oldest legends spoke of a child's laughter echoing through the narrow passageways, only to be heard by those who dared to listen closely. Then there were the footprints, not in the mud, but on the stone, clear, deliberate, and never found in the daylight. And the most unsettling find? A ring left in the wall, just as if someone had slipped it through a crack in the night. You know, there's one thing that's always bugged me about the Tower of London. It's not the ghosts, not the history, not even the secrets. It's the one detail that has never been explained. Every book, every tour guide, every historian mentions the White Tower, the crown jewels, the beefeaters, even the Bloody Tower. But there's one thing they all leave out, like it's a secret they're not allowed to tell. You've heard the stories. You've read the books. But what if the real mystery isn't the ghosts, or the crimes, or the legends? What if it's the silence, the one thing that's never been explained? And that silence is hiding something worse than a ghost. So what do you think? Is there something out there, waiting for someone to ask the right question? Or is the tower just too old, too full of secrets to ever be fully understood? You've heard the stories of the White Queen and the Bloody Queen, but what about the ones whispered in the shadows? Some say the ghosts of the tower's victims still walk these halls, unseen but felt. The locals say the tower isn't just haunted by the dead, it's haunted by the living. Some claim they've seen figures in the windows, dressed in the old regalia, staring back at them from the dark. One theory suggests the tower is a prison for the souls of the executed. They are said to be trapped between the living and the dead, unable to move on, unable to be free. And then there are the children's stories, whispers of a little girl who used to play in the gardens, now forever trapped in the walls, her laughter echoing at night. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. In the end, the tower is more than stone and mortar. It's a place where time stands still, and the past refuses to let go. The real question is, are we listening? There are some secrets that time can't erase, and some voices that refuse to be silenced. Even now, the tower still whispers, and no one knows where it's coming from. The crown jewels are safe, the beefeaters are on duty, and the ghosts are still here. But what is it they're trying to tell us? No one can say for sure. The mystery isn't just about who died here, it's about who's still here and why they can't move on. The tower doesn't just remember the past, it's still waiting for someone to listen. And so, the tower stands, a silent witness to centuries of blood and betrayal. Its secrets remain, its stories unfinished. What will it tell you, if you dare to stay a little longer? You've heard the whispers of the tower, but have you ever wondered what the stones remember? They hold more than just history, they hold the weight of silence. Maybe the ghosts aren't just trapped in the past, they're waiting for someone to listen, to feel the cold touch of something that's never gone. And as you walk away from the tower, remember this, some stories don't end. They just wait, like a candle in the dark, for the right hand to light them again. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I hear a voice calling from the stones. Perhaps it's time for another tale. You've heard of the sea, but have you ever heard of the sea whispering secrets? Mont St. Michel isn't just a place, it's a living legend. A place where the ocean bends to the will of the moon and the stones hold memories of centuries past. This is a place where the sacred and the supernatural blur. The abbey, the old lighthouse, the ancient stones, they all hum with stories, some whispered, some buried deep beneath the tides and time. Some say the light is not just a beacon, but a warning, a signal to those who are lost both in the sea and in the soul. And some say the light is not for the living. There are those who claim to have seen the light at night, not from the sea, but from the land. not from the top of the tower, but from the base, where the stones are cold and the wind is always with them. And there are those who say the lighthouse is not the only thing that watches, that the stones, the wind, the waves, they all remember. They remember what was lost and what was never found. You ever wonder how a place becomes haunted? Well, Mont St. Michels lighthouse wasn't built for the skies, it was built for the sea, and the sea has a way of remembering. Back in 1840, they started building this lighthouse on the cliffs of Mont St. Michel. It was a grand project, meant to guide ships through the treacherous waters, but the sea didn't take kindly to being tamed. The first lightkeeper, a man named Pierre Leclerc, was said to be haunted by the sea itself. He claimed the waves whispered to him, and the tides carried secrets no man should know. But it wasn't just the sea that haunted this place. Rumors say that during the construction, workers were killed by accidents, and some claimed to hear their voices in the wind long after they were gone. And then there was the final tragedy, a storm in 1850, when the lighthouse nearly collapsed. The lightkeeper and his family were lost to the sea, and from that day on, the lighthouse became more than a beacon, it became a tomb. You remember how the air got heavier, like the lighthouse itself was holding its breath. The wind died down, and the silence stretched like a thread about to snap. The keeper's wife said the sea had a taste like salt and fear. She'd been watching the tides for years and never seen them turn so quiet, so still. They found the keeper's journal the next morning, pages curling like dead leaves. The ink had bled through, as if the words had tried to escape the paper. The villagers said the sea had taken something, that the light had been a warning, and now it was too late. But I wonder, did it take the keeper, or did it take the light first? You've heard the whispers, but now you're standing at the edge of the cliffs where the lighthouse once stood. The wind carries the scent of salt and something older, something that clings to the stones like a ghost of memory. One stormy night in 1947, a young woman named Madeline Lefevre vanished without a trace. Her last known words were a plea for help, whispered to the wind as she climbed the final steps of the crumbling tower. The Coast Guard found no bodies, no signs of struggle, just a single, blood-stained handprint on the stone wall, and a torn piece of her dress clinging to the edge of the cliff. Years later, fishermen report seeing a figure in the distance, standing at the base of the lighthouse, watching them with eyes that gleam like the moon on the sea. They say Madeline was lured by the light, by a promise of something more than life. But the lighthouse never promised salvation, it only promised to take what it could not give. I spoke to a woman who said she saw the lighthouse glow on a night when it should have been dark. She said it wasn't just a light, it was a face watching her from the stones. Another man told me he heard the sound of a child's laughter echoing from the tower, but when he climbed the stairs, there was no one there, just silence and the cold wind. A local fisherman claimed he saw a figure in the light, wearing a white dress, standing at the edge of the cliff. He said it didn't move, just stared at him with eyes that seemed to see right through him. One woman swore she felt a chill run down her spine the moment she stepped inside the tower. She said it wasn't the cold, it was the air itself, like it had been holding its breath for decades. And then there's the one who said she saw a shadow move in the light, and when she turned, there was nothing, just the sea, the wind, and the whisper of something ancient still waiting to be heard. We followed the trail of whispered warnings and brittle maps to the lighthouse, where the sea whispers secrets and the stones remember every soul that ever walked the path. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp stone and something older, like the scent of a long-forgotten memory that clings to the walls. The last entry was dated the night the lighthouse burned, and it spoke not of fire, but of a voice that echoed through the stone, calling out in a language no one could understand. As we stepped away from the table, the light in the lighthouse flickered just once, and for a moment, it felt like the walls were breathing. We left with more questions than answers, and a feeling that the lighthouse was still watching, waiting for the next soul brave enough to listen. You know, sometimes the most terrifying things aren't the screams or the shadows, but the silence that follows. The silence that lingers after the last light has gone out in the lighthouse. They say the last keeper, a woman named Genevieve, left in such a hurry that her journal was never found. But the one thing they all agree on is that she never closed the door to the lantern room. Every time they've tried to open that door, it's locked from the inside. No key, no break-in, no sign of struggle. Just a door that refuses to close, as if something is still inside. And the one thing they've never been able to explain is why the door was left open in the first place. Was it an accident? A warning? Or did someone stay behind, waiting for the world to forget them? You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered why the lighthouse still stands? Some say it's not just a beacon for ships, but a beacon for the lost. And if you listen closely, you might just hear the echoes of those who never made it home. Local legends say the lighthouse was built not just to guide sailors, but to trap those who dared to approach too close. The sea, they say, is not a friend to the unwise, and the light is more than just a flame, it's a warning. There are those who say the lighthouse is haunted by the souls of the lost sailors, fishermen, and even the monks themselves. Some claim to see figures in the light, faces lost in the glow, watching from the water below. And then there are the theories. Some say the lighthouse is a trap, a place where the sea claims its own. Others whisper that the light is not a beacon, but a lure, drawing the curious to their doom. But no one knows for sure. And maybe that's the real mystery. You know, sometimes the most haunting things aren't the ghosts, but the questions that remain unanswered. What if the lighthouse wasn't just a beacon for ships, but for something else entirely? The last keeper's diary was never found. Not a page, not a word, just a silence that echoes through the stone like a funeral bell. The mystery isn't just about the past, it's about the present, the way the island feels when you're alone, when the wind stops and the silence becomes too loud. And so, we return to the question that haunts this place. What was left behind, and what is still waiting for us to find it? You ever notice how the wind seems to whisper when you're alone? It's like it's trying to tell you something, but you can't quite catch the words. Maybe it's just the sea, or maybe it's something else. Sometimes, the silence is the loudest sound. You can feel it, like the world holds its breath just before something happens. That's when you know you're not alone. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. There's a kind of peace in the unknown, isn't there? A quiet, heavy peace that lingers in the air, like the last note of a song that's never finished. And so, we leave it there, the lighthouse, the sea, the silence. A story that lingers like the echo of a ghost in the dark. Until next time. You've heard of haunted prisons, but have you ever imagined a place where the walls themselves seem to whisper secrets? HMP Slade, once a grim Victorian asylum for the criminally insane, now lies in quiet ruin, its halls echoing with the weight of forgotten lives. Built in the 1840s, Slade was meant to cure the minds of the mentally ill through moral treatment, a kinder, gentler approach to madness. But the reality was far darker, with overcrowding, neglect, and tragic deaths that made its reputation a legend in the making. Some say it's the ghosts of the patients who never left, trapped between the past and the present, their suffering echoing through the stone. Others believe it's the spirits of the staff, who saw too much and lived too long with the weight of their choices. And then there are the stories of the missing people who entered Slade and never left, or who left and never returned. The mystery deepens with every tale, and the air grows heavier with the unspoken question, what really happened there? You ever wonder how a place like HMP Slade came to be? It started as a quiet, rural village called Slade, where the fields stretched like a painter's canvas and the wind whispered secrets through the trees. But then, the British government decided to build a prison there, and the quiet was shattered. The prison was meant to house some of the worst offenders, but it quickly became a place of suffering and scandal. Men were beaten, tortured, and sometimes even killed in the name of order. The place was known as the White Hell for its cold, unrelenting brutality. The prison was run by a man named Sir Reginald Slade, a former army officer with a reputation for harshness. He believed in punishment as a form of rehabilitation, but many would say it was more about control than correction. The prison was also known for its mysterious deaths. Some say the inmates were killed by the guards, others by the cold, and some by forces they couldn't explain. The rumors of ghosts and hauntings grew with every passing year, but the real tragedy wasn't just the suffering of the prisoners, it was the way the prison became a symbol of the dark side of justice. It was a place where men were broken, not just punished. And when it finally closed, it left behind more than just stone and silence. So, you see, the history of HMP Slade isn't just about ghosts, it's about the weight of time, the echoes of pain, and the stories that refuse to fade. And now, we turn the page to the first haunting of the place. You remember the first time you noticed something wasn't quite right. It was a quiet Sunday, the kind of day where the world feels still, and then just a flicker in the corner of your eye. You turned, but there was nothing there, just the echo of a voice you couldn't place. You thought it was just the house settling, the old building creaking in the wind. But then the next morning, you found the door slightly ajar, though you'd left it locked. And the same whisper, faint and familiar, in your ear as you passed by the cell block. You started to notice the smells like bird toast and something sweet, like a child's breath. It was strange, but not unpleasant. You told yourself it was the old building, the way it held on to its history like a secret it wasn't ready to share. Then came the sounds. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the sound of a child's voice calling out. You knew it was real, but it was too real. And you couldn't stop listening. You told yourself you were being too dramatic, that you were imagining things. But the more you listened, the more you felt the weight of something watching you, and you couldn't shake the feeling that you were being invited to stay a little longer. You know, sometimes the worst crimes aren't the ones you hear about on the news. They're the ones that vanish, like a whisper in the dark. The ones that leave no body, no trail, just silence. In 1975, a young woman named Helen Whitaker walked into Slade with a future full of promise. She was bright, kind, and full of life, but she never walked out. No one saw her leave. No one heard her scream. Just a door that opened, and then nothing. The only thing left was a single sock, still warm, near the cell door. They searched the grounds, the cells, the records, but Helen was gone, and the prison, once a place of order, became a place of whispered fear and unanswered questions. To this day, some say they hear her voice, calling for help, echoing through the halls where no one should be alone. But no one dares to go looking. I've spoken to several folks who claim to have seen things in Slade. One woman swore she saw a woman in a white dress standing at the gate just before she left for the night. Another told me about the sound of children laughing in the halls, but when she asked where they were, the laughter would stop and the silence would be deafening. Some say the place is cursed, but others think it's just the weight of history pressing down on the walls. You ever feel like you're being watched in a place that's supposed to be empty? There's a sense of being trapped in time, like the past is still here, waiting for someone to listen. And sometimes, it seems like it's trying to tell you something. We started with the old maps, those yellow paper scraps with faded ink, and the first thing we found was a name we'd never heard before, the Hollow Ground. It was marked on the edge of the Slade estate, like a secret only the earth knew. Then came the old photographs, cracked, grainy, and full of ghosts. One showed a woman in a long black dress, her face pale and frozen in time, standing just outside the main gate of the prison, as if waiting for someone. One night, we found a hidden door behind a loose brick in the old warden's office. It opened to a small, damp chamber with a single lantern, its light flickering like a heartbeat in the dark. And then, the real strange things began. We found journals written in a woman's hand talking about a girl who vanished in the 1960s, and a voice that called her name from the walls at night. The more we read, the more we realize the girl's name was never written down. It was just there, in the air, in the silence, in the way the lantern's flame seemed to move of its own accord. You know, the thing that haunts me most isn't the screams or the shadows. It's the silence. The silence that lingers after the last prisoner has left, like the place itself is holding its breath. They say the walls here are alive, but I think it's the absence of sound that really gets to you. No echo, no footstep, just the weight of the past pressing down like a stone. No one ever found that cell. Not the guards, not the historians. It was just gone, like it had been erased from the building itself, or maybe from time. That's the thing, though. No one ever found it, and no one ever found the child either. Just the whisper and the silence and the weight of a story that refuses to end. Some say the whispers in the halls of Slade aren't just the wind. They're the voices of the ones who never made it out. You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered who they really were? Local legends say the men who were sent to Slade were never the same after. Some say they were broken by the cold, others say they were broken by the screams that came from the cells below. There's a theory that the prison's very foundation is cursed, built on a forgotten graveyard. Some say the earth remembers and the ghosts are just waiting for the right moment to rise. And then there's the one that haunts the most, what happened to the last prisoner who walked those halls. Some say he's still there, trapped, waiting for someone to hear his call. So next time you're passing by, take a moment. Listen closely. Sometimes, the echoes aren't just from the past, they're waiting for you to hear them. And so, the mystery of HMP Slade lingers, like a whispered secret in the dark. No bodies, no arrests, just a silence that feels too heavy for words. The last known prisoner, a man who vanished without a trace, became a ghost story in his own right. Some say he was a victim, others say he ran. No one knows for sure. The prison closed in 1990, and the silence that followed was louder than any scream. No one ever found the truth, and no one ever will. So, I ask you, dear listener, what do you think happened to him? Did he escape, or was he never truly gone? The echoes remain, waiting for someone to listen. As the last echo fades, I wonder if the walls of Slade still remember the laughter that once filled them before the silence took over. Sometimes, the quietest places hold the loudest stories, and I wonder if the stones here still whisper to the wind. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dub Smart Speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. So, if you're listening, I hope you're ready for the next ghostly chapter, because some places don't forget, and some stories are never done. Stay with me, and let's go deeper into the dark, where the past and present still share a single breath. You've heard of Stonehenge, but have you ever wondered what it looked like before the stones were carved? Before the hands of time tried to erase its secrets? The stones weren't always standing upright. They were dragged, pushed, and lifted by hands that long ago vanished into history. Some say the stones were not just built for the living, but for the dead. Others say they were raised to keep something buried beneath the earth from rising again. But there's something else about these stones, something that lingers in the air like a whisper from the past. A story that refuses to be forgotten. So, what if the stones were never just monuments? What if they were warnings? And what if we're still listening? You know, the first time people started carving these stones, they weren't thinking about monuments. They were trying to make sense of the world around them. You see, the people who built Stonehenge were farmers, but they also believed in magic, in the power of the earth and the sky. They gathered here during the solstices, during the times when the sun rose or set exactly over the stones. They danced, they prayed, they made offerings, sometimes of food, sometimes of blood. You can almost feel the energy in the air, even now. These markings were not just random. They were messages, warnings, maybe even curses. Some say the people who carved them were trying to communicate with the spirits of the stones. Others say they were trying to claim power over them. But whatever their intent, the damage was done. And then, in more recent times, people started to come here not just to worship, but to explore, to photograph, to touch, to leave behind their own marks. Some of them were curious, others were reckless, but all of them left something behind, whether it was a memory or a scar. So, you see, the history of Stonehenge isn't just about the past. It's about the people who have walked this land, who have touched these stones, and who have left their mark, sometimes with intention, sometimes without knowing what they were doing. You know how sometimes, even in the quietest of places, there's a feeling that something just isn't right? Well, that feeling started here, with the stones themselves. The air was thick, like it was holding its breath. The first sign wasn't a scream or a shadow, it was a silence. The usual hum of the wind had vanished, and the silence was so heavy, it felt like it was pressing down on your chest. Then came the whispers, not the kind you hear in a crowded room, but something low and drawn out, like the wind was trying to say something it wasn't meant to. The path around the stones, usually well-worn, was suddenly covered in a strange, dark residue. It looked like it had been spilled there in a hurry, like someone had been trying to leave a message we weren't meant to read. And then, the most unsettling thing of all, a piece of the stone, no larger than a fingernail, had been removed. Not broken, not chipped, just missing. Like someone had taken it, and it had left a mark that no one else could see. You've heard the legends of Stonehenge, but what about the night the stones whispered? A young man vanished without a trace, leaving only his boot print in the mud and a chill in the air that never left. The police said it was a prank gone wrong, but the locals know better. That night, the wind carried voices, whispers of a man pleading, then silence. No body, no clue, just the cold weight of absence. No one knows where he went, but they all know he wasn't alone. Some say the stones took him, others say he was never really there at all. The truth is buried, like the man himself. And if you ever find yourself standing there at dusk, listen closely. The stones may still be whispering, and the wind may still be calling his name. I remember the first time I stood at Stonehenge, the air so thick with history it felt like the stones themselves were breathing. You ever felt that way? Like the past is just beneath your feet, waiting to be heard. One visitor claimed to see a figure in the dark, moving between the stones like a wraith. She said it was tall, cloaked, and moved with a kind of purpose, as if it knew exactly where it was going. There's one story about a woman who said she saw a face in the stones, carved in a way that looked almost like it was meant to be seen. She didn't know how, but she could feel it watching her back. And then there's a man who said he felt the stones move, not in a way you can see, but in a way that made his bones ache. He said they were alive, not in the way we think, but in a way that made him feel small. These are just stories. They're echoes, reminders that Stonehenge is more than a place. It's a memory, a warning, a door. And sometimes, it's just waiting for someone to listen. We began with the old maps, the ones drawn by those who came before us. You've seen them, haven't you? The ones with red lines and faded ink, like someone's hand had trembled as they tried to mark the places where things went wrong. Then we went out at dawn, when the world is still and the stones feel like they're holding their breath. You ever notice how the light changes when you're near ancient places? It's like the sky holds its breath too. One of the locals said they'd seen something move in the night, a shape too tall and too narrow for a human. You'd think that would scare you, but it made you curious, didn't it? Like the ghost was trying to tell you something. We found old records, some written in a hand that looked like it had once belonged to a woman who'd been forced to write by a man. The words were smudged, like the writer had been crying. You can almost hear the silence between the lines. The most unsettling thing wasn't what we found, but what we didn't. Like the stones had been watching, waiting for someone to ask the right question. And when you do, the silence answers. You know, there's one thing about Stonehenge that has always made me wonder, why did they choose these stones? They're not the biggest, not the strongest, and certainly not the most beautiful. They're just different. What made them special enough to move across the country? It's like someone picked them from a junkyard and said, these are the ones we need. Oh, and why? I mean, you can't just choose rocks out of the wild and say, these are sacred. You have to have a reason, don't you? There's no record, no myth, no legend that explains why these specific stones were chosen. Not even a whisper of a reason. It's like they were just there, waiting to be moved. And that's what makes it so strange. Why would they pick them? Maybe it's not about the stones themselves. Maybe it's something deeper, something we've never been told. Maybe the people who built Stonehenge knew something we don't. Something that made these stones the right ones no matter how odd they looked. And here's the thing, dear listener, no one has ever found a reason, not even the scholars. That silence is louder than any explanation. That's why I keep thinking, what if they were never meant to be moved at all? You've heard the rumors, haven't you? That Stonehenge isn't just a monument to the ancients, but a graveyard of something far older, far darker. Some say the stones were never meant to stand, but to hold. Local guides tell of a legend that the stones were raised not by man, but by something else, something that walked the earth before time was written. And that something left its mark. Some claim the stones are not just cold, but alive. That they remembered the pain, the fear, the rituals that took place here long before the first tourists ever laid eyes on them. And then there are the whispers of a child's laughter echoing through the stones, of a woman's voice calling from the dark, of footsteps that never belonged to anyone who's ever walked this ground. So, what do you think? Is it just the wind? Or is there something else out there, something that's been waiting for you to listen? You know, sometimes the most haunting things aren't the ghosts we see, but the questions we can't answer. What if the real mystery isn't in the stones, but in the silence between them? The carvings are there, hidden in the cracks, but no one can agree on what they mean. Some say they're warnings, others say they're prayers, and some say they're messages from the dead, waiting to be understood. The police called it an accident, a few men lost in the dark, never to be found. But the locals still talk about the sound they heard, like a low, mournful hum, echoing from the stones themselves. We've studied the stones for centuries, but the truth still eludes us. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the stones aren't meant to be solved, just felt. And maybe that's why they still call to us. So here's the thing, dear listener, when you walk among the stones, listen closely. Not for the ghosts, but for the silence. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories are the ones that never end. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest whispers. Have you ever stood in a field and felt the earth itself holding its breath? Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. And sometimes, the stones don't just remember the past, they wait for the right moment to tell it again. What if they're waiting for someone to ask the right question? And what if the answer, when it comes, is not in the past but in the silence between the stones? Well, then, let's go find out. You've heard of the sea, but have you ever heard of the sea's edge? Imagine a place where the land meets the water, not in a clash, but in a whisper. This is Mont St. Michel, a place where the tide does more than rise and fall, it steals time. This isn't just a place, it's a living story, one that's been told for centuries. The lighthouse, once a beacon of hope for sailors, now stands as a silent sentinel, watching over the waters that once claimed many lives. They say the light here isn't just a tool for sailors, it's a warning, a voice, low and trembling, that calls out to those who drift too close to the shore. Some say it's the spirit of a sailor lost to the sea, others claim it's the voice of the land itself, calling for its lost children. The stories are old, but the mystery lingers. Some say the lighthouse was built to protect, but others say it was built to trap. And now, it watches in silence, waiting for the next soul to wander too close. So, come with me now, and let's walk the path where the sea meets the land. Let's see what secrets the lighthouse has kept for so long. You know, the lighthouse didn't start as a beacon of hope. It began as a place of fear, built on the bones of a medieval fortress that once held a dark secret. It was the 11th century, and the Mont St. Michel was a stronghold for the Counts of Rambouillet, who ruled with an iron fist and a lot of blood. When she finally escaped, she was found wandering the coastline, her eyes wide and unseeing, whispering to the sea as if it were her only friend. The locals called her the Lady of the Waves, and it was said that she cursed the land, bringing storms and madness to those who dared to defy her. When the first lighthouse was built in the 16th century, They hoped to banish the curse, but the light only seemed to draw the storms closer, as if the past was never truly gone. You remember how the sky turned that sickly green before the storm, don't you? The way the air smelled like damp stone and something older, something that had been waiting. It was like the lighthouse itself was holding its breath. The first keeper, Pierre, said the tide had come in too early. He had been watching for years, and never had he seen the sea rise like that, not even during the great storm of '39. The waves were whispering, and they weren't just water. The next morning, they found the keeper's lantern missing. Not just broken, not just stolen, but gone, as if it had never been there, and the sea had gone silent, as if it, too, had been waiting for something to happen. They said it was just the tide, just the wind, just a storm, but I tell you, the lighthouse didn't just wait for the storm. It called the storm, and it called something else, something that didn't come with waves or wind. It came with silence. You've heard the stories about the lighthouse, but what about the night the light went dark? They say the beam vanished, not just dimmed, but gone like someone had turned the world off. The keeper, a quiet man named Etienne, was last seen pacing the spiral staircase, muttering about the sea swallowing the light. His watch was still ticking, but he never made it to the top. The next morning, the light was back brighter than ever, but Etienne was never found. They say his body was never recovered, and the light has never dimmed since. Some say the light isn't a beacon anymore, it's a warning, a signal that the sea has claimed another soul. And the keeper's voice still echoes in the wind, calling for help. You've heard the stories about the lighthouse, but what about the night the light went dark? They say the beam vanished, not just dimmed, but gone like someone had turned the world off. I've heard from a retired lighthouse keeper in France who claims that on the night of the storm, the light went out and the sea whispered in French like the wind through old sails. Another said the walls of the lighthouse grew cold, even in summer, and the floorboards creaked like they were breathing, as if the place itself had a heartbeat. There's a story about a tourist who took a midnight walk and heard a voice calling her name, only to find the lighthouse doors locked and the light inside burning with a strange green hue. A local fisherman said that when he tried to sail near the lighthouse at dawn, his compass spun wildly and his radio crackled with static, as if the sea itself was trying to warn him. And then there's the most chilling one, a child who claimed to see a figure in the light, dressed in 18th century garb, waving at her, but when she looked again, it was just the wind and the waves. We arrived at the lighthouse just before dawn, the sky a bruised shade of gray. The wind howled like a forgotten wail, and the sea below churned as if it remembered every secret ever whispered here. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of old wood. The stairs creaked underfoot, and the walls seemed to breathe, as if they were alive and waiting for something to happen. We found old journals in the lantern room, pages yellowed and brittle, filled with accounts of the lighthouse keeper's final days, his obsession with the sea, his letters to a lost love, and a final note that read, "I hear her voice in the wind." The most unsettling discovery was a small, ornate mirror in the keeper's room. It had no frame, just a smooth, polished surface that seemed to watch us, as if it knew what we were about to find. In the end, we left the lighthouse with a heavy heart, the wind still howling, and the weight of something unseen lingering in the air like a ghost that wouldn't let go. You know, there's one detail that has never been explained. The one thing they all agree on, but no one can say for sure. The lighthouse itself, it's still standing, but it's not the same. They say the light was never out, but the Coast Guard says it was. They say it was a beacon, but the villagers say it was a warning. And no one knows why the light changed color on the night the last keeper vanished. The light was blue one moment, then red the next. No one could see it from the shore, but the keeper's wife said she saw it from the house. She said it was like the lighthouse was trying to say something. The Coast Guard found the keeper's body at the base of the tower, but the light was still on. They say it was a malfunction, but the villagers say it was a signal, a message from somewhere beyond the veil. No one knows what the light meant, but they all agree on one thing. The lighthouse was never just a lighthouse. It was a place where the past and present collided, and the light was the only thing that ever told the truth. You've heard the tales of the lighthouse, but what about the people who live here now? The locals say the light still flickers in the night, not for ships, but for those who never left. Some say the light is a warning, a signal from the past. Others say it's a trap, luring the curious and the lost into the dark waters below. The elders say the lighthouse is haunted by the souls of those who died trying to reach its soldiers, sailors, lovers, and children. Some say it's not a ghost, but a curse. And then there are the theories. Some say the lighthouse was built on an ancient burial ground. Others say it's a gateway to another realm. Whatever the truth, the light still burns. Even now, decades later, the lighthouse still whispers in the wind. They say it's the voice of the woman who drowned in the storm, trapped between the sea and the rocks. Did she ever find peace, or does she still wait for someone to listen? The Coast Guard has checked the rocks, the tide pools, the ruins. Nothing, no body, just the echo of a woman's cry. They say she was a fisherman's wife caught in a storm, and the lighthouse was her only hope. But hope didn't save her. No one knows what happened to her. No body, no proof, just a ghost and a legend. The town still remembers her. They light a candle on the anniversary, and they whisper her name into the wind, hoping she'll hear. So, when you stand at the edge of the cliff, looking out at the sea, ask yourself, is the light a beacon or a warning? And if the lighthouse is still burning, is it for the living or for her? You know, sometimes the most unsettling silence is the one that follows a story, like a ghost's last whisper fading into the night. I wonder what the sea whispers to the stones of Mont St. Michel at midnight. Does it remember the ones who vanished in its embrace? There's something about the sea that never forgets, especially when it's got a story that's been buried for centuries. So, as we leave the lighthouse behind, remember this: the past is never far away, it just waits for the right moment to remind you. But don't worry, there are more stories to come. Just like the tides, they'll return, and they'll be waiting. You've heard of the Mont St. Michel, that jewel of the Bay of Mont St. Michel. But have you ever wondered what lies beneath its sacred stones? This place, where the sea meets the sky, has a reputation that's as old as the tide, haunted, sacred, and shrouded in whispers. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. It's a place where miracles are said to have happened, and where some say the veil between the living and the dead is thinnest. But the lighthouse, yes, the lighthouse has a story of its own. A tale that's been passed down like a family secret, never quite told, but always whispered. There are stories of sailors who vanished near these shores, of voices calling from this sea, of a light that guides the lost but never the living. And then there's the lighthouse itself, old, silent, and always watched. Some say it's not just a tower, but a keeper of something far older than the sea. So, you're here now, listening to a story that's been waiting for you. But what if the lighthouse is watching you, too? What if it's not just the sea that's calling? Let's find out, together, what's truly hiding in the light. You know, the lighthouse wasn't always a beacon of hope. It began as a simple tower, built by a group of monks in the 8th century, who believed it would protect the sacred island from the sea's wrath. But the monks had their own secrets. Some say they were cursed by the sea, others claim they were haunted by a ghostly woman who drowned herself in the storm. The lighthouse became more than a watchtower. It was a place where the sick were brought for healing, where the desperate sought protection, and where the sea itself seemed to listen. But as the centuries passed, the lighthouse took on a life of its own. Some say it was built not just to guide ships, but to guard a secret buried beneath the sand and stone. And so, the legend grew. A place where the past never sleeps, where the sea and the stone whisper secrets to those who dare to listen. You remember the way the light used to dance in the waves, how it painted the sea with gold. But now, the light's gone quiet, and the water seems to hold its breath. The keepers started to notice things, small things, like the wind changing direction without warning, or the smell of salt, and something else, something old and wrong. Then came the voices, whispers in the dark, asking for help, asking for release. Some said they heard the sea itself weeping, as if it were mourning the dead. The final sign came when the light went out for good, and the sea began to change. The waters turned a strange, pale blue, and the rocks near the shore began to crumble, as if something beneath the surface was waking. You remember the storm, don't you? The sky was a bruised purple, and the wind howled like a grieving widow. The sea roared, and the lighthouse burned with an unnatural fire, as if something inside it had gone mad. They say the light was steady, but the men who worked there swore it pulsed like a heartbeat, like a warning. Some said it was the last breath of the drowned sailor who once lived there. Others said it was the soul of the lighthouse itself, calling for help. Then came the night they never explained. The last keeper vanished, and the light went dark. No body was found, no trace, just silence and the echo of a single, mournful cry from the sea. Some say the light still flickers at night, just for a moment. Just long enough to make you wonder if you're being watched or if you're the one who's been forgotten. I've heard from several witnesses who claim to have seen the light of the lighthouse flicker in the wrong direction, as if it were guiding something else toward the shore. One man said he saw a figure in the beam moving like a shadow, but when he tried to follow it, it vanished into the mist. Another said the light appeared during a storm, and when it cleared, the lighthouse was gone, leaving only a faint mark in the sand. The stories all point to something lingering, something watching, and something that refuses to be forgotten. We arrive at Mont St. Michel at dawn, the mist curling like old secrets around the stone walls. The lighthouse stood like a sentinel, its lantern dark and its eyes watching. The guide led us through the narrow streets, his voice slow, as if the stones themselves might remember what happened here. He spoke of the lightkeeper who vanished without a trace. Inside the lighthouse, the air was thick with the scent of salt and age. The walls were lined with rusted tools and faded photographs, each one a ghost of a life once lived. We found his journal, written in a hand that trembled. He spoke of a sound, a whisper that came from the sea, and a light that never went out even when the sun had set. The final entry was dated the night he vanished. It read, "The light is not mine to keep. It is watching. It is calling. I cannot stop it." You know, the thing that has never been explained is the way the lighthouse still burns, even when no one is there. It's not just the light. It's the way the light seems to pulse, like it's breathing, like it's alive. The keepers say it's just the old lamp, still working, still burning, even after the last lightkeeper left. But they never tell you about the nights when the light turns red, or the way the sea seems to whisper through the cracks in the stone. Some say the light is a warning, a beacon to the lost, or a call to the drowned. Others say it's just the wind, the tide, and the memory of a girl who never made it to shore. But you can't help but wonder, what if the light is calling for her? And that's the one detail no one can explain. The way the light still burns, the way it seems to call to something beneath the waves, and the way it feels, sometimes, like it's waiting for someone to come back. You've heard the stories, but here in the village, we whisper of a different tale. Some say the lighthouse wasn't built for light, but for something far older, something that watches, waits, and whispers through the stones. The old fishermen swear the lighthouse has eyes, not just the stone lantern, but the walls themselves. You can see it when the wind is right, those slits in the stone, like they're watching you from the dark. Some say the lighthouse was built to hold a curse. Others say it was built to trap a spirit. But the villagers here know this: the light burns for the dead, not the living. And if you listen closely at the right time, you might hear it too, a voice, not from the tower, but from the stones themselves. A low hum, like a lullaby from the sea, echoing through the centuries. So when you're here, don't look too long at the stones. Don't linger too long by the light, because the lighthouse doesn't just shine for the living, it shines for the ones who are never found. And yet, the mystery lingers, unresolved, like the last echo of a storm. No body was ever found. No trail was ever fully followed. It's as if the sea itself swallowed the truth. Some say the woman never left, that she still walks the cliffs at night, her dress trailing in the salt air. Others whisper she was never there at all, just a figment of a sailor's fevered mind. The lighthouse, now a museum, still holds its secrets close. They say the wind carries her voice in the night, a soft, mournful song that only the most attuned can hear. And so the story remains, a thread pulled tight between the sea and the shore. The woman, the storm, the light, each one a part of the same, unspoken mystery. You might think, after all this time, the mystery would fade. But no, some stories refuse to be forgotten. They wait like a tide to be heard again. You've heard the whispers of the lighthouse, felt the weight of its silence. But what if the light isn't just a beacon, it's a mirror? A mirror to the choices we make, the secrets we bury, and the ghosts we carry into the light. The sea never sleeps, and neither does the stone. But sometimes, it's the quietest moments that hold the deepest truths. Like the way the tide lingers just a little longer than it should. And remember, dear listener, when the light fades, the stories don't. They wait, they watch, they whisper, and sometimes, they call. But for now, let the lighthouse rest. The next tale will come when the wind stills and the world is quiet again. Until then, stay warm, stay curious, and keep your eyes open. You ever heard of the Bermuda Triangle? It's not just a myth, it's a place where the ocean seems to breathe with secrets. You think it's just a stretch of water, but you'd be wrong. It's a place where the sea has a memory and it's not fond of us. Legends say it's where ships and planes vanish without a trace. But you know what? You can't just blame the water. Sometimes, it's the stories we tell ourselves that make the place feel cursed. Or maybe it's the stories that the place tells us. But here's the thing, the Bermuda Triangle isn't just a place. It's a story. And stories, like ghosts, have a way of sticking with you. So if you're listening, you might just be in for a tale that's been waiting a long time to be told. So, dear listener, you've come to the edge of something that's never really been explained. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the mystery isn't the problem, it's the truth that's been buried. And now you're about to step into that story where the sea remembers and the past won't let go. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Before you go, if you enjoyed this, please give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell us in the comments what you'd like us to make next. We read every single one. Thank you so much for watching. Comment this emoji if you made it to the end.